You're just lazy, Eleanor. The words her mother had hurled at her for years shattered like glass when the psychiatrist's letter revealed the truth. Ellie wasn't lazy. She had been silently battling an invisible disability while drowning in shame. For years, she'd struggled to complete simple tasks, the letters on her homework swimming before her eyes as her mother's disappointment grew, until a perceptive teacher finally saw what everyone else had missed. What life-changing diagnosis was hidden in that letter, and how will it transform a mother forced to confront years of unintentional cruelty? If this story moved you, please comment with your experiences, like and subscribe to our channel, and share with someone who understands that what we label as laziness often masks a deeper struggle. The fluorescent lights of Westfield High hummed overhead as Ellie stared at her chemistry test. The questions blurred before her eyes despite having studied for hours the night before. Her mind felt like a radio stuck between stations, static drowning out every clear thought. 15 minutes remaining, Mr. Peterson announced. Panic surged through Ellie's chest. She had only completed 3 questions out of 20. Her pencil trembled as she tried to focus on the next problem. But the words jumbled together, mocking her efforts. Around her, pencils scratched against paper, a symphony of productivity that excluded her. Jessica Chen, already finished, was checking her answers 2 rows over. Even Tyler, who rarely studied, was steadily working through the test. 5 minutes. Ellie's eyes burned with unshed tears. She frantically scribbled partial answers, knowing they were wrong, but desperate to show something for her efforts. Time's up, pencils down. As Mr. Peterson collected the papers, he paused at Ellie's desk. Eleanor, he whispered, eyebrows furrowed. See me after class. The remaining students filed out while Ellie sat motionless, stomach churning with familiar dread. This is the 3rd test you've underperformed on, Mr. Peterson said, sliding her paper across the desk. Are you studying at all? Yes, Ellie whispered. I studied for hours. I knew it last night. Then what's the problem? Are you applying yourself? Because your potential is being wasted. I know, Ellie had heard it all before. I'm trying, Mr. Peterson. He sighed. I've heard that before, Eleanor. At some point, trying isn't enough. You need to produce results. The bell rang for the next period. She was already late for English. I'll do better next time, she promised automatically, the words hollow. I certainly hope so. English class brought fresh humiliation. Ms. Delaney had assigned oral presentations on The Great Gatsby, and today was Ellie's turn. She'd prepared meticulous notes, color-coded and organized exactly as her mother had insisted would help. But, as she stood before 27 pairs of eyes, her carefully crafted introduction vanished from her mind. Ellie stared at her notes, but the words swam on the page. Gatsby represents the ... Snickers rippled through the classroom. Take a breath and start again, Ms. Delaney encouraged. Ellie nodded, but the mental fog only thickened. Sweat dampened her collar as silence stretched painfully. Perhaps you should sit down and collect your thoughts, Ms. Delaney finally suggested. We'll come back to you. Red-faced Ellie returned to her seat, avoiding eye contact with her classmates. The rest of the period passed in a blur of shame. When the bell rang, Ms. Delaney called out, Eleanor, a word please. I prepared, I swear, Ellie blurted before Ms. Delaney could speak. I believe you, Ms. Delaney said, surprising her. But this isn't the first time you've struggled with presentations or in-class assignments. Your homework, when you complete it, shows intelligence and insight, yet you're failing my class. Ellie stared at her shoes. I know. What's happening at home? Is everything okay? The concern in Ms. Delaney's voice nearly broke Ellie's composure. Everything's fine. I'm just... I don't know. My mom says I need to try harder. And do you think that's the issue? Not trying hard enough. For a moment, Ellie considered telling the truth, how she would read the same paragraph 10 times and still not comprehend it. How her thoughts scattered like startled birds whenever she tried to focus. How her mother's disappointment weighed heavier than any textbook. Instead, she shrugged. Probably, Ms. Delaney didn't look convinced. Well, I'm assigning you a study partner for the next assignment. Hannah Miller has excellent organizational skills. Perhaps working together will help. Thank you, Ellie mumbled, though the thought of Hannah put together Hannah witnessing her struggles made her stomach clench. That afternoon in history class, Mr. Brennan returned their essays. Disappointing work, Miss Campbell, he said loudly as he dropped Ellie's paper on her desk. A large red D glared up at her. accompanied by comments about disorganized thinking and failure to follow basic instructions. Behind her, someone whispered, "Shocking." A muffled laugh followed. Ellie carefully placed the essay in her folder, face burning. She'd spent an entire weekend on that paper, researching until her eyes hurt, typing and deleting and retyping until 2 a.m. None of it mattered. The results were always the same. As the final bell rang, Ellie moved slowly, dreading the walk home. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother: "Meeting with client, dinner, in fridge, finish homework before TV." At least she'd have a few hours of peace before facing her mother's inevitable questions about today's test. A few precious hours before hearing those 3 words that defined her existence: "Just try harder." Ms. Rivera's classroom stood empty after the final bell, except for the quiet figure in the back row. Ellie hunched over her math worksheet, erasing so vigorously that the paper tore. She'd been working on the same problem for 15 minutes. "Still here, Eleanor?" Ms. Rivera asked, approaching with a gentle smile. Ellie jumped. "Sorry, I'll go. I just wanted to finish this before." "No rush. Take your time." Ms. Rivera pulled up a chair. "Mind if I sit?" Ellie shrugged, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "You know," Ms. Rivera said, glancing at Ellie's paper, "I've noticed something interesting about your work." Here it comes, Ellie thought. Another lecture about potential and effort. You understand the complex concepts, the why behind the equations, but the sequential steps trip you up. Ellie blinked in surprise. "What?" "Look here." Ms. Rivera pointed to an earlier problem. "Your approach shows deep mathematical understanding, but you reversed these numbers, skipped this step entirely, and then compensated with a brilliant workaround that most students wouldn't think of." For the first time in months, Ellie felt a flicker of pride. It's like watching someone play chess brilliantly, but struggle to set up the board. Ms. Rivera continued. "The same pattern appears in your essays, insightful thoughts arranged in a way that doesn't quite follow conventional structure." Ellie's throat tightened. "My mom says I need to be more organized, follow directions better." "Organization can be learned," Ms. Rivera agreed. "But Ellie, have you ever considered that your brain might simply work differently than most?" The question hung in the air like a lifeline Ellie was afraid to grasp. "I've taught for 20 years, Ms. Rivera continued when Ellie remained silent. "I've seen hundreds of lazy students. You're not one of them." A tear slipped down Ellie's cheek before she could stop it. "I want to try something." Ms. Rivera took out her phone. "I'm going to read some questions, and I want you to answer honestly. No right or wrong answers." Ellie nodded hesitantly. "Do you often find yourself daydreaming when others are speaking directly to you?" "Yes, all the time." "Do you struggle to complete tasks that require sustained mental effort every day?" "Do you frequently lose things necessary for activities, assignments, pencils, books?" "My mom says I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached," Ellie whispered. Ms. Rivera continued asking questions. With each answer, the knot in Ellie's chest loosened slightly. Someone was finally seeing her. Ellie. "Seeing her." "Eleanor," Ms. Rivera said finally, "have you ever been evaluated for ADHD?" "ADHD?" Ellie frowned. "Isn't that for hyperactive little kids?" "I'm not bouncing off walls or anything. That's a common misconception. ADHD presents differently, especially in girls. It's not always about hyperactivities. Sometimes it's about attention regulation, being unable to focus when you need to, or hyperfocusing on things that interest you to the exclusion of everything else." Ellie thought about the hours she'd spent researching ancient Egyptian burial practices for fun. So absorbed she'd forgotten to eat dinner, yet she couldn't focus on a 20-minute homework assignment to save her life. "But I'm 16, Ellie protested. "Wouldn't someone have noticed by now?" "Not necessarily. Bright students like you often compensate well enough in elementary school. It's when academic demands increase that the challenges become more apparent." Ms. Rivera hesitated. "And girls are typically underdiagnosed. Their symptoms are often attributed to other things, like laziness," Ellie murmured. "Like laziness," Ms. Rivera agreed softly. "Ellie, would you be open to an evaluation? It might provide some answers." Hope dangerous and fragile flickered in Ellie's chest. "My mom would never agree. She doesn't believe in labeling kids. Says it's just an excuse." "What if I spoke with her, teacher to parent?" "She'll just say I need more discipline." Ellie's voice cracked. "That I need to try harder." Ms. Rivera's expression grew serious. "Eleanor, look at me. How hard are you trying right now?" "As hard as I can," Ellie whispered, tears finally spilling over. every single day. I believe you. Ms. Rivera's voice was firm. And if what I suspect is correct, you're working twice as hard as your classmates for half the results. That's not fair to you. Ellie wiped her eyes with her sleeve. So what happens with this evaluation thing? It's a process. Interviews, questionnaires, tests. If you are diagnosed, there are treatments, accommodations, strategies that can help. Things could get easier, Eleanor. The possibility of easier seemed as remote as Mars. Would you like me to call your mother and discuss this? Ellie hesitated, then nodded. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not hope exactly, she wasn't brave enough for that yet. But possibility, a small, fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken after all. Yes, she said quietly. Please call her. Ms. Rivera squeezed her shoulder. You're not lazy, Eleanor. You're working harder than anyone knows. Let's find a way to make that work pay off. As Ellie gathered her belongings, the weight on her shoulders felt marginally lighter. Someone believed her. Someone saw past the unfinished assignments and missed deadlines to the struggling girl beneath. It wasn't much, just one teacher with a theory, but after years of drowning, even a small breath of air felt like salvation. Diana Campbell's heels clicked sharply against the linoleum as she strode down the school hallway, her tailored blazer and tight ponytail projecting the confidence she wielded like armor. She'd rescheduled the client meetings for this appointment, and her irritation simmered just below the professional veneer. Ms. Rivera rose as Diana entered the classroom. Mrs. Campbell, thank you for coming. I'm Sophia Rivera, Eleanor's math teacher. Diana, please. Her handshake was brief but firm. I understand there's an issue with Eleanor's performance. Please, have a seat. Ms. Rivera gestured to a chair beside her desk, rather than across from it, a small but deliberate choice to establish partnership rather than opposition. Diana perched on the edge, handbag on her lap. I'm aware Eleanor has been struggling. I assure you, we're addressing it at home. I have no doubt, Ms. Rivera said carefully. Eleanor is clearly putting in tremendous effort. Not enough, apparently. Diana's smile was tight. But I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I'll increase her study time and limit distractions further. Ms. Rivera leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Campbell, Diana, I asked you here today not because I think Eleanor needs more pressure, but because I believe she may need a different kind of support altogether. Diana's eyebrows arched. Meaning, I've been teaching for over 20 years. I've seen thousands of students, and Eleanor stands out. She shows remarkable intelligence, coupled with specific struggles that follow a pattern I recognize. What pattern would that be? One consistent with ADHD, particularly the inattentive presentation that's often missed in girls. Diana's expression hardened. You're suggesting my daughter has a disorder based on what? Poor test scores, incomplete homework. Based on careful observation of her work patterns, her specific strengths and challenges, and direct conversations with Eleanor about her experiences. With all due respect, Ms. Rivera, you're a math teacher, not a psychiatrist. Diana's voice remained level, but frost-edged each word. Eleanor doesn't need a label. She needs discipline and focus. May I ask, Diana, how much effort does Eleanor put into her schoolwork at home? Clearly not enough. Actually, she reports studying for hours, often late into the night. Then she's not studying effectively. Diana shifted in her seat. Look, I appreciate your concern, but there's nothing wrong with my daughter. She simply needs to apply herself. Ms. Rivera considered her next words carefully. When you were Eleanor's age, did school come easily to you? Something flickered across Diana's face, a brief crack in her composure. I worked hard and succeeded. No excuses. Your daughter is working extremely hard with diminishing returns. That suggests the approach isn't working. Not that the effort is lacking. Diana stood abruptly. I know my daughter, Ms. Rivera. Eleanor has always been dreamy, easily distracted, but with proper structure and consequences, she improves, temporarily, at least, and then slides back, because she gets complacent. Ms. Rivera remained seated, her voice gentle but firm, or because she's exhausting herself with compensatory strategies that aren't sustainable. Diana paced the small classroom. My mother raised 4 children while working 2 jobs. I put myself through law school as a single mother. No one gave U.S. labels or special accommodations. Perhaps some might have helped, Ms. Rivera suggested quietly. Diana stopped pacing. What exactly are you proposing? A professional evaluation? If I'm wrong, you'll have confirmation that Eleanor simply needs to try different study strategies. But if I'm right, you'll have access to treatments and accommodations that could transform her academic experience and brand her as disabled for life. Diana shook her head. These labels follow children. They become crutches, excuses for mediocrity, or explanations that provide paths to success. Ms. Rivera countered. Diana, Eleanor believes she's failing. That she's fundamentally flawed. That's dramatic, is it? Last week, she told me she sometimes wishes she could be anyone else, anyone normal. Diana flinched as if struck. For a moment, her carefully constructed facade wavered. Just consider the evaluation, Ms. Rivera pressed gently. For Eleanor's sake. Diana gathered her handbag, composure restored. I'll think about it, but I'm not making any promises. That evening, Diana chopped vegetables with military precision, each slice expressing her lingering frustration. Across the kitchen island, Ellie worked on homework, her pencil tapping an irregular rhythm that grated on Diana's nerves. Eleanor, stop that tapping. Diana's knife came down with particular force on a carrot. Focus on your work. Ellie's pencil stilled immediately. Sorry. Diana studied her daughter covertly. Eleanor had her father's eyes thoughtful deep. She'd also inherited his tendency to drift, to exist partly in some internal world Diana couldn't access. It had charmed her in James, until his dreaminess had extended to forgetting their anniversary, missing mortgage payments, and eventually, finding their marriage too constraining for his creative spirit. I met with Ms. Rivera today, Diana said casually. Ellie's shoulders tensed. Oh, she seems to think you have ADHD. What do you think? Ellie asked, not looking up from her textbook. Diana set down her knife. I think life is challenging for everyone. I think labels can become self-fulfilling prophecies. I think you're perfectly capable of succeeding without special treatment. I'm trying, Mom. I know, sweetheart. Diana softened slightly. But trying isn't always enough. You need to try smarter, not harder. Ellie nodded, but Diana caught the slight slump of her shoulders, the brief closing of her eyes that signaled retreating to that unreachable inner space. Later, after dinner and dishes, and another hour of supervised homework, Diana stood in the doorway of Ellie's bedroom. Her daughter had finally fallen asleep, textbooks still scattered across her bed, pencil clutched loosely in her hand. Diana gently removed the books and pencil, drawing the blanket over Ellie's slender form. In sleep, the worry lines disappeared from her daughter's forehead. She looked peaceful, young, reminding Diana of the curious, bright-eyed child who used to pepper her with questions and create elaborate fantasy worlds. When had that light dimmed? When had Ellie's default expression become one of anxious anticipation, as if constantly bracing for the next failure? Diana brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Maybe, just maybe, there was no harm in at least exploring Ms. Rivera's suggestion, not because she believed it, but because she'd already tried everything else. We'll figure this out, she whispered, though Ellie couldn't hear her. I promise. The waiting room of Dr. Melissa Chen's office featured soothing blue walls, comfortable chairs, and a notable absence of clinical sterility. Ellie sat rigid beside her mother, leg bouncing unconsciously, as she flipped through an outdated National Geographic without absorbing a single word. Eleanor Campbell, a woman with silver-streaked hair and rectangular glasses, appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood. I'll be right here, her mother said, not looking up from her phone where she was undoubtedly answering work emails. Dr. Chun's office contained 2 armchairs, a small desk in the corner, and walls lined with bookshelves. No clipboard, no white coat, just a kind-faced woman who gestured to the more comfortable-looking chair. Eleanor, right? Or do you prefer Ellie? Ellie, I'm Dr. Chen. I specialize in neurodevelopmental assessments, particularly for adolescents and young adults. She settled into the opposite chair. Do you know why you're here today? Ellie traced the pattern on the armrest. My math teacher thinks I might have ADHD. And what do you think? The question caught Ellie off guard. No adult had asked for her opinion on the matter. I don't know, she admitted. I've always been this way, so it's hard to know if how my brain works is ... wrong. Not wrong, Dr. Chen corrected gently. Different. And that difference can create challenges in environments not designed for your neurotype. Ellie considered this like school. Exactly. Today's evaluation will help us understand how your mind processes information, manages attention, organizes thoughts, and regulates emotions. There's no passing or failing, we're just gathering information. Over the next 3 hours, Ellie completed a battery of assessments. Some tested her ability to sustain attention through mind-numbingly boring tasks. Others challenged her to organize information or recall sequences. Computer programs measured her reaction times and ability to inhibit automatic responses between assessments. Dr. Chen asked questions about Ellie's daily life, not just academic struggles, but everything from sleep patterns to social interactions to emotional regulation. Do you ever find yourself hyperfocusing on activities you enjoy? Dr. Chen asked. You mean like getting so into something I forget to eat or sleep? Yeah, all the time. Last month I spent 14 hours straight redesigning my Minecraft world. Mom was furious, and yet homework assignments feel impossible. Sometimes, Ellie finished. Even when I'm interested in this subject, it's like my brain refuses to engage, even when I'm trying to make it. Dr. Chun nodded, taking notes. Do you find your emotions sometimes feel more intense than seems appropriate for the situation? Ellie thought about crying over a misplaced textbook or feeling crushing disappointment over minor setbacks. Yes, and organizing tasks into steps. Nightmare, Ellie admitted. I know where I want to end up, but breaking it down into pieces feels overwhelming. As the session continued, Ellie found herself describing experiences she'd never put into words before, how time seemed to slip away from her without notice, how instructions evaporated from her memory moments after hearing them, how her thoughts constantly interrupted each other in a chaotic internal cacophony. It's exhausting, she confessed. Like everyone else got an instruction manual for life and I'm just winging it badly. Dr. Chen's eyes reflected understanding rather than judgment. That sounds incredibly frustrating. The worst part is disappointing my mom. She tries to hide it, but I can see it, that look when I've messed up again. When the assessments concluded, Dr. Chen invited Diana to join them. We've completed the formal evaluation, she explained to Diana. I'll analyze the results and prepare a comprehensive report, but I'd like to share some initial observations. Diana's posture was perfect, her expression neutral. Please do. Ellie demonstrates above-average intelligence, particularly in abstract reasoning and creative problem-solving. However, her performance on sustained attention tasks, working memory, and executive function measures all indicate significant challenges, consistent with ADHD, predominantly inattentive presentation. Diana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And what exactly does that mean in practical terms? It means Ellie's brain processes information and manages attention differently from most people. These differences create very real obstacles in traditional academic settings, despite her intellectual capabilities, so she has trouble focusing. Diana summarized dismissively. Don't we all? Dr. Chen's voice remained gentle but firm. ADHD isn't occasional distraction, Diana. It's a fundamental difference in how the brain regulates attention, processes information, and manages executive functions like organization, time management, and emotional regulation. And your solution is medication, I presume. Treatment options include medication, but also behavioral strategies, environmental modifications, and educational accommodations. We'll discuss all options once the full assessment is complete. Ellie stared at her hands, the adults' voices fading into background noise as relief and anxiety battled within her. She wasn't crazy, she wasn't broken. There was a name for the invisible war she'd been fighting, and, apparently, she wasn't the only soldier on the battlefield. On the drive home, Diana maintained a loaded silence until they were halfway there. We'll get a second opinion, she finally said. Why? Ellie asked quietly. Because you don't like the first one. Diana's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Because thorough parents explore all options before accepting life-changing diagnoses. It already changed my life, Mom. Every day for 16 years. The only difference now is having an explanation. Diana pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine but made no move to exit the car. I just don't want you limited by a label, Eleanor. Once you start believing you can't do something because of ADHD, I already believe I can't do things. Ellie interrupted, unexpected tears blurring her vision. Every day, I believe I'm not good enough, not trying hard enough, not enough. At least now there's a reason. That isn't just me being defective. Diana turned to face her daughter, really seeing the pain etched in her features. For a moment, her carefully constructed defenses wavered. "You've never been defective," she whispered. "Never." Ellie wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "Then why does it feel that way?" Diana had no answer for that. 7-year-old Ellie sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by the scattered remains of her science project, due tomorrow. Cardboard, markers, glue, and crumpled paper formed a chaotic landscape around her small figure. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the instructions, reading them, for the 12th time, without comprehension. Eleanor. Her mother appeared in the doorway, still in her work clothes. "What on earth? When did you start this project?" "Last week," Ellie hiccuped, "but I didn't know how to begin, and then I forgot, and then I remembered yesterday but couldn't find the materials. And now it's ruined, and Mrs. Winters will be disappointed again." Diana surveyed the mess, exhaustion battling with frustration on her face. "Why didn't you ask for help sooner?" "I thought I could do it myself this time." Ellie's voice was small. Diana sighed, setting down her briefcase. "Move over, we'll fix this." They worked until midnight, Diana directing and Ellie following instructions with desperate concentration. The finished solar system model was adequate though, far from exceptional. "Next time," Diana said as she tucked an exhausted Ellie into bed, "start earlier and ask for help immediately. You're too old for these last-minute crises." Ellie nodded, ashamed. She'd promised herself this time would be different. This time she'd be organized, focused, capably like the other kids, like her mother wanted. The memory dissolved into another. 9-year-old Ellie standing frozen in the cereal aisle, her mother's grocery list clutched in her hand. Diana had gone to the dairy section, trusting Ellie with one simple task: get the cereal. But there were so many boxes, so many colors and brands. Was it the blue box or the red one? Cheerios or Chex? The harder she tried to remember, the more her mind emptied of everything except rising panic. "Eleanor, what's taking so long?" Her mother's exasperated voice cut through the fog. Ellie pointed mutely at the shelves, words failing her. Diana reached past her, grabbing the orange box of Cheerios. "This, the same one we buy every week." "How could you forget?" "Because everything in my head gets jumbled up when I'm nervous," Ellie had wanted to say. "Because there are too many choices and I can't sort through them when you're expecting me to be quick." Instead, she'd whispered, "Sorry." More memories surfaced. The mortification of being the last one still working on a timed math test in 4th grade, the constant misplacement of library books, homework assignments, permission slips, the teacher conferences, where the same phrases repeated year after year: intelligent but disorganized, bright but scattered, doesn't apply herself consistently. At 11, Ellie had developed her first coping strategy by accident, hiding in the girls' bathroom to avoid the chaotic cafeteria. She'd discovered that tracing the grout lines between tiles with her finger helped calm her racing thoughts. Soon she had an arsenal of subtle, self-soothing techniques, humming quietly while working, bouncing her leg under her desk, twisting a strand of hair around her finger exactly 17 times. These small rituals created just enough order in her internal chaos to function until they didn't. As academic demands increased, her makeshift solutions crumbled. By middle school, the gap between her capabilities and her performance had widened into a chasm. 12-year-old Ellie sat at the kitchen table, staring at math homework that might as well have been written in Sanskrit. Her father, James, attempted to help before his patience frayed. "You knew how to do this yesterday," he said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I know," Ellie whispered. "I forgot." "How do you forget something overnight?" She had no answer that made sense. Her father's eventual departure a year later had nothing to do with her, at least that's what everyone assured her. The divorce was about incompatible priorities and irreconcilable differences between her parents. Still, Ellie couldn't help wondering if her constant neediness, her academic struggles, her inability to just be normal, had contributed to the stress that fractured her family. After James left, Diana had thrown herself into her legal career with renewed intensity. Their modest home became a shrine to organization: color-coded calendars, labeled containers, strict schedules. Diana implemented increasingly structured systems for Ellie's schoolwork: daily homework checks, weekend review sessions, rewards and consequences tied to academic performance. Sometimes, the systems worked briefly. Ellie would experience a precious week or two of relative success, earning her mother's rare, brilliant smile of approval. Those moments sustained her through the inevitable backslide when her fragile organizational systems collapsed under pressure. By 14, Ellie had mastered the art of hiding her struggles. She volunteered answers only when absolutely certain they were correct. She crafted excuses for incomplete assignments, claiming to have left them at home rather than admitting she'd forgotten the task entirely. She learned which teachers would allow her extra time if she stayed after class, looking appropriately contrite and hardworking. Her bedroom became both sanctuary and battlefield. Diana insisted on weekly cleaning, but within days, entropy reclaimed the space, clothes in piles rather than drawers, books stacked in precarious towers, homework vanishing into the mysterious black holes that seemed to follow Ellie everywhere. Not everything was struggle. Ellie discovered unexpected islands of competence where her brain's unique wiring became an asset rather than a liability. Her art teacher praised her unusual perspectives and attention to minute details others overlooked. In creative writing, her tendency to make unexpected connections between ideas produced stories her teacher called remarkably original. During a poetry unit in freshman English, Ellie had experienced her first taste of genuine academic success. Given 3 weeks to write and memorize an original poem, she'd hyperfocused on the project, staying up until 3 a.m. several nights in a row, the words flowing effortlessly once she found her rhythm. Her performance had earned a standing ovation from classmates and the first A+ on her high school transcript. 4 days afterward, she'd ridden the high of achievement, wondering if she'd finally broken through whatever barrier had been holding her back. Maybe she'd finally figured out how to be normal, how to succeed, how to make her mother proud. Then came the history project she couldn't organize, the chemistry formulas that refused to stay in her memory, the Spanish vocabulary that jumbled in her mind. The crushing disappointment of realizing her breakthrough had been temporary was worse than never having experienced success at all. Now, lying in bed after the evaluation with Dr. Chen, 16-year-old Ellie traced familiar patterns in her ceiling texture while tears leaked silently into her pillow. All those years of believing she was fundamentally flawed, inherently deficient, all that wasted energy trying to become someone her brain wouldn't allow her to be. What might have been different if someone had recognized the signs earlier? How much pain could have been avoided with a simple explanation? Your brain works differently, and that's okay. We can help. Dr. Chun's office was quieter in the late afternoon. The psychiatrist sat alone at her desk, reviewing her notes on Eleanor Campbell. On her computer screen, test results painted a clear picture, scores that zigzagged dramatically between strengths and weaknesses. A classic profile of a bright mind with ADHD. She began typing the formal assessment letter, weighing each word carefully. After 20 years in practice, Melissa Chen knew these letters could change lives for better or worse. For adolescents like Ellie, a diagnosis provided explanation, not excuse. For parents like Diana Campbell, however, the same words could feel like an indictment. To whom it may concern. This letter summarizes the comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation conducted for Eleanor Campbell Dobe Entrusted Diciembre de 2009. On May 14, 2025, she outlined Ellie's presenting concerns, summarized the assessment procedures, and began the section she knew would matter most. Findings: Eleanor demonstrates cognitive abilities in the superior range, with particular strengths in abstract reasoning, visual spatial processing, and creative problem-solving. However, significant discrepancies exist between her intellectual capabilities and her academic achievement, particularly in areas requiring sustained attention, sequential processing, and executive functioning. Specifically, Eleanor shows marked difficulty with sustaining attention on non-preferred tasks, organizing and prioritizing information, managing time effectively, regulating emotional responses to frustration, working memory and recall of verbal instructions, task initiation and completion. These difficulties are not attributable to insufficient effort, lack of motivation, or inadequate intelligence. Rather, they are consistent with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, predominantly inattentive presentation ADHD-PI closing parenthesis. Dr. Chen paused, considering Diana Campbell's evident resistance. The next section would be crucial. It is important to note that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition with strong genetic components. It is not caused by poor parenting, lack of discipline, or character deficits. Individuals with ADHD often work harder than their neurotypical peers to achieve similar results, developing exhausting compensatory strategies that frequently fail under increased demands. Eleanor's academic struggles do not reflect insufficient effort. On the contrary, she appears to be exerting tremendous effort with diminishing returns, leading to chronic stress, decreased self-esteem, and emotional exhaustion. Dr. Chen continued with treatment recommendations, including medication options, behavioral strategies, and educational accommodations. She concluded with the paragraph she hoped would reach Diana, with appropriate support and intervention. Individuals with Eleanor's profile often experience significant improvements in academic performance, emotional well-being, and self-confidence. The goal of treatment is not to change who Eleanor is, but to reduce unnecessary suffering and allow her natural intelligence and creativity to flourish without the constant barriers imposed by unmanaged ADHD. Eleanor possesses remarkable strengths that can serve her well throughout life. Addressing her challenges now will help ensure those strengths are not overshadowed by remediable difficulties. After proofreading the letter twice, Dr. Chen printed and signed it, sliding it into an envelope addressed to Diana Campbell. She added her business card and several informational pamphlets on ADHD in adolescence, then sealed the envelope. 2 days later, Ellie sat in Dr. Chen's waiting room while Diana spoke privately with the psychiatrist. Through the closed door, she could hear the murmur of voices but couldn't distinguish words. Her leg bounced nervously, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. When they emerged, her mother's face was unreadable. Diana thanked Dr. Chen formally and gestured for Ellie to follow her out. The drive home passed in tense silence. Only when they pulled into their driveway did Diana speak. Dr. Chen recommends medication, among other things. Ellie waited, heart pounding. I told her I need time to consider all options. What does that mean? Ellie asked carefully. Diana's hands remained on the steering wheel, though the engine was off. It means I'm not rushing into medicating my 16-year-old daughter. There are behavioral therapies, organizational strategies. Did Dr. Chen say medication would help? She said it might. She also said it's not magic. I never thought it would be magic, Ellie said quietly. I just thought maybe it could be easier. School, life, everything. Diana finally turned to look at her daughter. We'll discuss this more after I've done additional research. That night, Ellie lay awake long after midnight, replaying the day's events. Her mother had disappeared into her home office after dinner, presumably researching ADHD treatments. The formal diagnosis letter sat in Diana's briefcase, unshared with Ellie despite her requests to read it. A week passed with no further discussion. Diana implemented new organizational systems for homework, color-coded folders, a detailed planner, nightly check-ins, but avoided mentioning ADHD, medication, or Dr. Chen. Ellie complied with the new systems, while silently drowning in the increasingly demanding end-of-year assignments. Then came the English final and in-class essay worth 20% of her grade. Despite studying extensively, Ellie froze when the prompt was distributed. Her thoughts scattered like startled birds, refusing to settle into coherent sentences. By the time she managed to begin writing, half the allotted time had passed. She turned in an incomplete essay, knowing it would earn a failing grade. That afternoon, she arrived home to find a package from Dr. Chen's office on the porch. Inside was a copy of her full assessment report, along with several books on ADHD. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the report. Eleanor, knowledge is power. You deserve to understand your own mind. Dr. Chenelli read the entire report twice, hungry for understanding of herself. The clinical language somehow made her struggles more real, more legitimate, not character flaws, but documented neurological differences. The relief was profound. Tears blurred her vision as she read Dr. Chen's final summary. Eleanor is not defined by her challenges but by her remarkable resilience in facing them. With appropriate support, her prognosis is excellent. As her mother's car pulled into the driveway, Ellie made a decision. She retrieved the sealed envelope containing the original diagnosis letter from her backpack, where Dr. Chen had slipped it after their last appointment. On the kitchen counter, she placed the letter alongside a note of her own. Mom, I know you need time, but I'm drowning while you research. Please read Dr. Chen's letter. I'm not asking for magic, just help. Love, Ellie. Then she retreated to her room, closed the door, and waited for her mother to come home. Diana spotted the envelope immediately upon entering the kitchen. Her name was printed in Dr. Chen's neat handwriting, the seal unbroken. Beside it lay a folded note in Ellie's familiar, slightly messy script. She set down her briefcase and purse, shrugged off her jacket, and poured herself a glass of wine before approaching the counter. The workday had been brutal: difficult client, a postponed hearing, a senior partner's cutting remarks about her divided attention lately. She wasn't sure she had the emotional bandwidth for whatever awaited in that envelope. Ellie's note was brief but piercing. "I'm drowning while you research." The words twisted something in Diana's chest. She knew that feeling of struggling to stay afloat while others deliberated your fate from dry land. With a deep breath, she opened Dr. Chen's letter and began to read. The clinical language was initially a buffer, allowing her to process the information with professional detachment. Superior cognitive abilities, significant discrepancies, executive functioning deficits. But as she continued reading, the buffer thinned, then disappeared entirely. Individuals with ADHD often work harder than their neurotypical peers to achieve similar results, developing exhausting compensatory strategies that frequently fail under increased demands. Diana's hand trembled slightly. The sentence could have described her own childhood struggles: the meticulous lists, the obsessive organizing, the late nights of study while her siblings slept. She'd attributed her academic challenges to being not naturally smart like her sister, compensating with relentless discipline and effort she'd overcome through sheer force of will, hadn't she? Eleanor's academic struggles do not reflect insufficient effort. On the contrary, she appears to be exerting tremendous effort with diminishing returns, leading to chronic stress, decreased self-esteem, and emotional exhaustion. An unexpected memory surfaced. 11-year-old Diana, hiding in her bedroom closet, gasping for breath between silent sobs after bringing home a C on a history test she'd studied for all week. The crushing shame, the certainty that she simply wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't good enough. She'd never wanted Ellie to feel that way, yet she'd unknowingly recreated the same dynamic, pushing her daughter to overcome perceived deficiencies through willpower alone, just as her own mother had done to her. Diana poured more wine with an unsteady hand and continued reading. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition with strong genetic components. Genetic, the word landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. If Ellie had inherited this condition, where had it come from? James had always been distractible, prone to hyperfocusing on his art while neglecting practical matters. But Diana recognized herself in the descriptions too: the exhausting effort to maintain organizational systems, the struggle to transition between tasks, the deep, almost paralyzing procrastination followed by frantic last-minute work. Had she been fighting the same invisible battle her entire life without knowing it? The treatment recommendations blurred as tears filled her eyes. She blinked them away impatiently, determined to finish reading. The goal of treatment is not to change who Eleanor is, but to reduce unnecessary suffering and allow her natural intelligence and creativity to flourish without the constant barriers imposed by unmanaged ADHD. Unnecessary suffering. The phrase echoed in her mind, accompanied by a slideshow of Ellie's tears over homework, her defeated expression when facing another disappointing grade, her increasing withdrawal and self-doubt. Diana set down the letter and pressed her palms against her eyes. A sob escaped before she could suppress it, then another. Years of misunderstanding her daughter, of pushing when Ellie needed support, of demanding when she needed accommodation, of dismissing genuine neurological differences as character flaws crashed over her like a wave. "Mom." Ellie stood in the kitchen doorway, uncertain and vulnerable. Diana hastily wiped her eyes, but it was too late to hide her tears. "I read the letter," Diana said unnecessarily. "I see that." Ellie approached cautiously, as if her mother might bolt. "Are you okay?" Diana laughed, a broken sound. "I should be asking you that." She looked at her daughter, really looked at her, the shadows under her eyes from sleep deprivation, the teeth marks on her lower lip from anxious chewing, the slight hunch to her shoulders, as if perpetually bracing for a criticism. How had she not seen the toll this was taking? "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," Diana whispered. "For what?" "For not listening, for making it harder when it was already so difficult for you. For, double quotes, Diana's voice broke. For making you feel like you weren't enough." Ellie's eyes widened. In 16 years, she had rarely seen her mother cry, and never liked this raw and unguarded. "I thought I was helping you," Diana continued. I thought structure and discipline would fix everything. I thought if I pushed hard enough, you'd break through whatever was holding you back. You didn't know, Ellie said softly. I should have. Diana shook her head. A good mother would have seen that you were drowning, not defiant. Ellie was silent for a moment. Does this mean ... Are we going to try the medication? Diana nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes, and the other recommend school accommodations, everything Dr. Chun suggested. I'll call her office tomorrow. Relief washed over Ellie's face, quickly followed by uncertainty. What changed your mind? Diana picked up the letter again, running her finger over a particular paragraph. This part about unnecessary suffering. I never wanted you to suffer, Eleanor. I thought I was preparing you for a difficult world, by making home difficult too. The quiet question pierced Diana's heart. That was never my intention. I thought I was helping you build strength, by constantly pointing out my weaknesses. Diana flinched. I deserve that. I'm not trying to hurt you, Mom. I just need you to understand. Every time you said I wasn't trying hard enough, I believed you. And I tried harder, but nothing changed. Eventually, I started believing I was just ... broken, defective. You're not, Diana said fiercely. You're brilliant and creative and compassionate. And I've done a terrible job of telling you that. Ellie blinked rapidly, fighting tears. So, what happens now? Now we get you the help you deserve, and ... Diana hesitated. I may need to do some work on myself as well. Some of what Dr. Chun described. It resonated with my own experiences. You think you might have ADHD too? I don't know. Maybe. But that's a question for another day. Diana stood and opened her arms tentatively. Right now, I just want my daughter to know that I believe her, and that I'm sorry. So very sorry. Ellie stepped into her mother's embrace. For the first time in years, the hug didn't feel like a brief obligation, but a genuine connection to people holding each other through shared pain, with the fragile hope of healing. That morning arrived with an unfamiliar atmosphere in the Campbell household. Diana had called in to take a rare personal day, leaving Ellie uncertain about the new dynamic between them. She found her mother at the kitchen table, laptop open but ignored, 2 mugs of coffee waiting. I made you hot chocolate, Diana clarified, pushing the Mickey Mouse mug of childhood relic toward Ellie. I thought we could talk before you head to school. Ellie slid into a chair, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. About the ADHD, about everything. Diana closed her laptop. But we can start there. A heavy silence fell between them. Years of careful conversation, of saying what they thought they should, rather than what they felt, had left them without a roadmap for genuine dialogue. Called Dr. Chen this morning, Diana finally said. She's sending in a prescription for the medication she recommended. We can pick it up this afternoon. Ellie nodded, relief and apprehension mingling in her chest. How? How does it work? The medication. Diana shifted into information gathering mode, her comfort zone. It's a stimulant called meth. Apparently, it helps regulate neurotransmitters in the brain, particularly dopamine, which affects attention regulation and executive function. There are potential side effects: decreased appetite, trouble sleeping, increased heart rate, but Dr. Chen believes the benefits outweigh the risks in your case. No, I mean ... double quotes. Ellie hesitated. How does this work? Us, moving forward. Are things going to be different now? Diana's carefully composed expression softened. Yes, things will be different, but I'm not exactly sure how yet. I think we're both going to be figuring this out as we go. You're not mad anymore about the diagnosis. I was never mad about the diagnosis, Eleanor. Diana sighed. I was afraid. Afraid that labeling you would limit you. Afraid that I'd failed you somehow. Afraid that ... double quotes. She trailed off. Afraid that what? Afraid that I'd been wrong. That I'd been making things harder for you instead of helping. Diana's voice caught. And I was right to be afraid, because that's exactly what happened. Ellie studied her hot chocolate. You were doing what you thought was best. That doesn't excuse it. No, but it explains it. Ellie looked up at her mother. I'm still angry sometimes, about all the years of feeling like I was disappointing you, about believing I was broken. Diana nodded, accepting the pain her daughter's words caused. You have every right to be angry, but I'm also relieved, Ellie continued, to know there's a reason, that it wasn't just me being ... lazy. She spoke the last word quietly, still feeling its sting. You have never been lazy. Diana reached across the table, covering Ellie's hand with her own. Lazy people don't stay up until midnight, struggling with homework. They don't try the same math problem 15 times. They don't care enough to cry over missed assignments. Ellie blinked back tears. Ms. Rivera said the same thing. I should have said it years ago. Diana squeezed her hand, then released it. We should leave soon if you're going to make it to school on time. Actually, I was wondering. Ellie hesitated. Could I maybe stay home today, with you? Just this once. Diana's initial instinct was to refuse to insist on routine, responsibility, normalcy, but the hopeful vulnerability in Ellie's expression stopped her. Yes, she said instead. I think that would be good for both of us. They spent the morning researching ADHD together, Diana taking meticulous notes while Ellie identified with description. After description of common experiences, they laughed in startled recognition at some examples, like becoming so engrossed in an interesting task that basic needs, like eating or using the bathroom, were forgotten. Remember when you were 10 and got so absorbed in building that Lego castle that you didn't notice it was dark outside? Diana recalled. You'd been at it for 8 hours straight. Or last month when you were preparing for that Johnston case, and didn't realize you'd worked through dinner until I brought you a sandwich at midnight. They looked at each other in sudden understanding. Maybe the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Diana said softly. And the afternoon they picked up Ellie's prescription. The pharmacist provided instructions on timing, potential side effects, and monitoring. Diana asked detailed questions while Ellie listened, still processing the reality that tomorrow morning she would take a pill that might fundamentally change how her brain functioned. Are you nervous? Diana asked as they drove home. Yes, Ellie admitted. What if it doesn't work? Or, what if it works but changes who I am? Dr. Chen was clear that it won't change your personality, just help with specific brain functions. But what if those functions are part of who I am, my creativity, or imagination, or whatever? Diana considered this. That's a valid concern, but remember, you can always stop taking it if the downsides outweigh the benefits. This isn't an irreversible decision. The evening brought another novel experience. Dinner without interrogation, about homework or tests. Instead, they discussed strategies for managing ADHD beyond medication, apps for organization, techniques for breaking down tasks, ways to create external structure for internal chaos. I ordered some books, Diana said, setting aside her plate. And I found a support group for parents. There's one for teens too, if you're interested. Ellie nodded, still adjusting to her mother's complete reversal. Maybe. I'd need to think about it. Of course, Diana hesitated. I also scheduled an appointment for myself with Dr. Chen. Ellie's eyes widened. Really, reading about ADHD? Many of the symptoms resonated with my own experiences. I've compensated well enough to function, but perhaps at a cost I didn't recognize. Diana gave a self-deprecating smile. My extreme organizational systems might be more than just type of personality. Dad used to call you Commander Campbell, because of all your lists and schedules. Diana's smile faded slightly at the mention of James. Yes, well, your father had his own challenges with organization. Do you think he might have had it too? ADHD? It's possible. Many creative types do. Apparently, Diana began clearing the table, her movements precise and controlled. Your father's difficulties with responsibility extended beyond executive dysfunction. However, the familiar tension whenever James was mentioned crept back into the room. Some wounds were still too fresh for casual discussion. Later, as Ellie prepared for bed, Diana appeared in her doorway with a small wrapped package. What's this? Ellie asked, accepting the unexpectedly heavy gift. Open it. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with Ellie's initials embossed on the cover. I thought you might want to document this journey, Diana explained. Your experiences with the medication, the changes you notice, your thoughts and feelings through the process. It might help you make sense of things. Thank you, Ellie whispered, running her fingers over the smooth leather. This is really thoughtful. Diana lingered in the doorway. Eleanor, I want you to know something. Whatever happens with the medication, with school, with everything else, I'm proud of you. Not for your grades or achievements, but for your resilience, for continuing to try when it would have been easier to give up. The words Ellie had longed to hear for years finally reached her, and their impact was overwhelming. Tears spilled before she could stop them. Diana crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed, awkwardly patting her shoulder. Physical comfort had never been her strong suit. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, she said quietly. To really see you. Ellie leaned against her mother's shoulder, accepting the tentative embrace. They had a long way to go. Years of misunderstanding couldn't be undone in a single day, but for the first time in her memory, Ellie felt something new and precious growing between them. Understanding. Diana Campbell had approached motherhood the same way she approached her legal career, with meticulous research, careful planning, and unwavering dedication. Now faced with her daughter's diagnosis, she fell back on these familiar patterns. Her home office transformed into an ADHD research center. Medical journals, neuroscience publications, and parenting books formed precarious towers on her normally pristine desk. Her laptop browser contained dozens of open-tab support forums, educational resources, medical studies, personal blogs, written by adults with ADHD. Mom, Ellie stood in the doorway, eyeing the chaos with surprise. What is all this? Diana looked up, reading glasses perched on her nose. Research. Did you know there are at least 7 distinct types of attention, and that ADHD actually involves difficulties with attention regulation rather than attention deficit? Ellie stepped cautiously into the room. How long have you been at this? Diana glanced at her watch and blinked. 6 hours, apparently. Have you eaten? I had coffee. Ellie raised an eyebrow. Coffee isn't food. Mom, I'll eat soon. I just need to finish this article on executive function hierarchies. A small smile played at the corners of Ellie's mouth. You know what this is, right? What hyperfocus classic ADHD symptom? Diana opened her mouth to object, then closed it. Well, perhaps. How's the medication going? Diana asked as they sat together at the kitchen table, sharing the sandwich Ellie had insisted on making. It's weird, Ellie said. Not bad weird, just different. Different how? Ellie considered the question. It's like, all my life, my thoughts have been like a room full of bouncing rubber balls, constantly moving, impossible to catch. But now, it's like someone slowed them down. I can actually grab one and hold on to it long enough to examine it before it bounces away. Diana nodded, making a note in the small notebook she'd taken to carrying. Any side effects? Dry mouth, not very hungry, a little jittery, the first day, but that's better now. And school, better, not perfect, but better. I actually finished a worksheet in class today. The whole thing, before the bell rang. Ellie's smile held wonder at this seemingly small achievement. Diana reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. That's wonderful. 3 weeks later, they sat in Dr. Chun's office for Ellie's follow-up appointment. The psychiatrist smiled as they entered. How are things going, Ellie? Good, I think. Ellie glanced at her mother. The medication helps a lot with focusing in class and starting assignments. I'm still having some trouble with organization though. That's to be expected, Dr. Chun said. Medication can help with attention, but executive skills like organization often require additional strategies and practice. We've been trying different approaches, Diana interjected, pulling out her notebook. Digital reminders, visual schedules, breaking tasks into smaller steps. Some are working better than others. Dr. Chun nodded approvingly. Excellent. It's important to recognize that medication is just one tool in the toolbox. A comprehensive approach involves behavioral strategies, environmental modifications, and skill development. She turned to Ellie. Any concerns with the medication? It wears off too soon sometimes. By the time I start homework in the evening, it's not working as well. We can adjust the dosing schedule or consider a longer-acting formulation. Dr. Chen made notes in Ellie's chart. What about sleep and appetite? Still not very hungry during the day, but I eat a big dinner. Sleep is okay as long as I take the medication early enough. The appointment continued with detailed discussions of Ellie's progress, challenges, and next steps. Diana asked numerous questions, each carefully noted in her ever-present notebook. I'm impressed with how thoroughly you've educated yourself, Diana, Dr. Chen commented. Many parents find the learning curve overwhelming. I want to understand what Eleanor is experiencing, Diana said simply. I've missed too much already. Dr. Chen smiled. Well, I have something for both of you. She handed them each a business card. This is Jessica Ramirez. She's a therapist who specializes in ADHD coaching and cognitive behavioral strategies. I think she'd be an excellent resource for developing those organizational skills we discussed. On the drive home, Ellie was quieter than usual. What's on your mind? Diana asked. Do you think I need therapy? Is something wrong with me? Diana chose her words carefully. ADHD coaching isn't traditional therapy. It's more like having a personal trainer for your brain, someone who understands how your mind works and can teach you specific strategies to build on your strengths and manage your challenges. But why can't you just help me? You've read everything about ADHD. I've read a lot, Diana acknowledged, but I'm still learning myself. And she hesitated. I think we both might benefit from having a neutral party involved. Someone who doesn't have our history. Ellie stared out the window. You mean someone I won't disappoint if I mess up. Diana's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Someone who can see situations objectively, without the emotional baggage we both carry. 2 days later, they sat in Jessica Ramirez's comfortably cluttered office. The therapist, a woman in her early 40s with a warm smile and colorful glasses, created an immediate atmosphere of acceptance. Before we dive in, Jessica said after introductions, I want to be clear about something. ADHD is a different neurotype, not a disorder to be cured, but a brain variation with both challenges and strengths. My job isn't to fix you, Ellie, but to help you understand how your brain works and develop strategies that align with your natural tendencies rather than fighting against them. Ellie relaxed slightly at these words. That said, Jessica continued, living with ADHD in a world designed for neurotypical brains can be genuinely difficult. The struggles are real, and acknowledging them isn't admitting defeat, the first step toward finding effective solutions. For the next hour, Jessica led them through a series of exercises and discussions that illuminated aspects of ADHD neither Diana nor Ellie had fully understood. They talked about time blindness, the difficulty perceiving time accurately, about rejection, sensitivity dysphoria, the intense emotional response to perceived criticism, about the ADHD interest-based nervous system that made motivation inconsistent and unpredictable. Willpower isn't the answer, Jessica explained, as Diana took copious notes. External structure, meaningful consequences, and intrinsic interest are far more effective motivators for the ADHD brain. By the end of the session, both Campbell women were mentally exhausted but energized by new understanding. One last thing, Jessica said as they prepared to leave. Diana, I'd like you to consider something. Given what you've shared about your own experiences and tendencies, have you thought about being evaluated yourself? Diana nodded slowly. I have an appointment next month. Good, Jessica smiled. Self-understanding is a powerful thing. And Ellie, she turned to the teenager, remember what I said about fish climbing trees? Ellie smiled. That judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree is unfair, but we do it to people with ADHD all the time. Exactly. You're not a broken, neurotypical person. You're an intact, valuable, perfectly functioning person with ADHD, different, not less. As they left the office, Diana felt a strange mixture of hope and grief. Hope for Ellie's future, with proper support, and grief for all the years spent trying to force a fish to climb. Westfield High School's administrative offices maintained a carefully cultivated atmosphere of institutional efficiency. Potted plants that required minimal care flanked a reception desk where Mrs. Gonzalez had presided for 23 years. Behind her, a corridor led to various administrative offices, including that of Principal Harriet Morgan. Diana and Ellie sat side by side in uncomfortable chairs outside the conference room, waiting for their 3:30 appointment. Diana reviewed her notes one last time while Ellie bounced her leg nervously, the movement creating a subtle but persistent rhythm. Ms. Rivera said she'd meet us here, Ellie whispered, checking the time again. She'll be here, Diana assured her, though her own anxiety bubbled beneath her professional demeanor. She'd attended dozens of meetings with school officials throughout Ellie's academic career, but this one felt different. Today, she wasn't coming to hear about her daughter's shortcomings or to promise stricter oversight at home. Today, she was Ellie's advocate. Ms. Rivera appeared moments later, offering them both a warm smile. Ready, as we'll ever be, Diana replied, gathering her materials. Principal Morgan was already seated at the conference table, along with Mrs. Patterson, the school counselor, and Mr. Brennan, Ellie's history teacher who also served as the grade-level coordinator. Their expressions ranged from neutral to slightly skeptical as introductions were made. Thank you for meeting with us, Diana began, her courtroom confidence evident. As you know from our email exchanges, Eleanor was recently diagnosed with ADHD, predominantly inattentive presentation. We're here to discuss appropriate accommodations under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Principal Morgan nodded. We've reviewed the documentation you submitted, Mrs. Campbell. However, I should note that Eleanor has maintained passing grades throughout her academic career, which raises questions about the necessity of formal accommodations. Diana felt Ellie stiffen beside her. Before she could respond, Ms. Rivera spoke up. With respect, Principal Morgan, passing grades is a misleading metric in this case. Ellie's standardized test scores and cognitive assessments indicate abilities in the superior range, yet she's achieving barely average grades with extraordinary effort. That discrepancy alone warrants attention. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat. Ms. Rivera, while I appreciate your advocacy, I've taught thousands of students over my career. What I've observed in Eleanor is inconsistent effort, not disability. Some assignments are exemplary, others incomplete or careless. That suggests motivation issues, not ADHD. Diana opened her mouth to object, but Ellie spoke first. That's exactly what ADHD looks like, Mr. Brennan. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Interest-based nervous system. When something captures my interest or creates the right kind of pressure, I can hyperfocus. Other times, no matter how hard I try, I can't make my brain engage. It's not about wanting to succeed, it's about having inconsistent access to my own cognitive resources. The adults at the table turned to her with varying expressions of surprise. Ellie rarely spoke up in class, let alone in meetings like this. Well, articulated Eleanor, Mrs. Patterson said. But part of education is learning to complete tasks even when they're not inherently interesting. All students struggle with that. Not in the same way, Diana interjected. The ADHD brain has documented differences in dopamine regulation that directly impact motivation and attention. This isn't about preference or character-rich neurology. Principal Morgan sighed. What specific accommodations are you requesting? Diana slid copies of a neatly organized document across the table. Extended time on tests and assignments, permission to use noise-canceling headphones during independent work, access to lecture notes or recordings, use of organizational aids and technology, preferential seating, breaking larger assignments into manageable components with separate deadlines. That's quite extensive, Mr. Brennan noted with raised eyebrows. These are standard accommodations for ADHD, Ms. Rivera countered. And they don't lower academic standards, they simply remove barriers to Ellie demonstrating her actual knowledge and abilities. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with Diana presenting research, educational precedents, and specific examples of how Ellie's ADHD manifested in classroom settings. Ms. Rivera provided additional context from her observations, while Ellie occasionally contributed insights about her own learning experiences. Gradually, the skepticism from the school officials began to soften. I think we can implement most of these accommodations, Principal Morgan finally conceded. Mrs. Patterson will draft a 504 plan for review. However, she added, looking directly at Ellie, accommodations are not exemptions. You'll still be responsible for mastering the same material as your peers. I understand, Ellie said. I don't want lower standards. I just want a fair chance to meet them. As they left the meeting, Diana squeezed Ellie's shoulder. You were fantastic in there. I was terrified, Ellie admitted, but also kind of angry when Mr. Brennan said that thing about inconsistent effort. Like he knows what's happening in my brain better than I do. That's exactly why self-advocacy is so important, Ms. Rivera said. No one understands your experience better than you. The following weeks brought gradual but meaningful changes to Ellie's school experience. Most teachers implemented the accommodations without resistance, though their approaches varied considerably. But Ms. Delaney in English embraced the opportunity wholeheartedly, restructuring some assignments to include visual components and offering multiple pathways to demonstrate mastery of concepts. She even invited Ellie to create a presentation on ADHD for the class, framing it as an extension of their unit on diverse perspectives in literature. Mr. Peterson in chemistry was more reluctant, providing accommodations with visible reluctance, and occasional comments about special treatment. His attitude stung, but Ellie found that with medication, therapy, and appropriate supports, she could finally engage with the material in meaningful ways despite his personal views. Most surprising was Mr. Brennan's evolution. After their initial meeting, the history teacher had approached Ellie privately. I've been reading about ADHD, he'd said, somewhat gruffly. It appears I may have misunderstood some aspects of your situation. I'd like to work with you to find effective strategies for my class. By the end of the semester, Ellie had raised her history grade from a D to a B+, largely through breaking essays into component parts with separate deadlines and using voice-to-text software for initial drafts. Not every subject saw dramatic improvement. Math remained challenging, though Ms. Rivera's continued support made it manageable. Physical education became easier once the coach understood that Ellie's occasional inattention wasn't disrespect but genuine difficulty maintaining focus during lengthy instructions. The most profound change, however, was in Ellie herself. For the first time in her academic career, she began experiencing success that didn't feel like a temporary reprieve from inevitable failure. Her confidence grew incrementally with each completed assignment, each test that accurately reflected her knowledge rather than her executive functioning challenges. It's strange, she told Diana one evening as they reviewed her latest progress report. School is still hard. I still have to work really hard, but it's a different kind of hard. Now, different how? Diana asked. Ellie considered the question. Before, it was like trying to run through quicksand, exhausting and terrifying and ultimately futile. Now, it's more like running uphill. Still challenging, but possible. And sometimes, when everything works right, I actually enjoy the challenge. Diana smiled, recognizing in her daughter's words the first tentative steps toward a future where Ellie's intelligence and creativity could flourish without being constantly undermined by unaddressed challenges. I'm proud of you, she said simply. And for once, Ellie believed her. Thanksgiving at the Campbell-Whitaker household had always been a carefully orchestrated event. Diana's mother, Margaret Whitaker, presided over traditions with military precision, while Diana executed the logistical components with her characteristic attention to detail. This year, however, the familiar rhythms were disrupted by new understanding and unspoken tensions. Eleanor, please set the dining room table, Margaret called from the kitchen where she was supervising the turkey. Use the good china, not the everyday plates. Ellie, who had been helping her Uncle David with a crossword puzzle, nodded and headed to the china cabinet. And don't forget, the water glasses go above the knives, not to the side, Margaret added. Last year was a disaster. Diana emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Mom, it was hardly a disaster. The glasses were 2 inches from their proper position. Details matter, Diana. You of all people should understand that. Diana and Ellie exchanged a glance, a new form of silent communication they'd developed in recent months. As Ellie carefully arranged silverware, her Aunt Valerie entered the dining room, wineglass already in hand, though it was barely noon. So, Ellie, Valerie said, leaning against the doorframe, your mother tells us you've been diagnosed with that attention disorder, ADHD, is it? Very trendy these days. Ellie froze, a fork suspended over the table. It's not a trend, Valerie, Diana said coolly, joining them. It's a well-documented neurodevelopmental condition. Of course, Valerie waved her hand dismissively. I just mean it seems everyone has a label now. In our day, we just called it daydreaming and got on with things. In our day, many people struggled unnecessarily because their conditions went unrecognized, Diana countered, including, potentially, some in this family. Margaret appeared in the doorway, tension evident in her posture. Let's not start this discussion again, Diana. Today is about family, not diagnoses. ADHD is part of who Ellie is, which makes it relevant to family gatherings. Diana's tone remained measured but firm, especially when certain family members make dismissive comments. I wasn't being dismissive, Valerie protested. I'm just saying these labels can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Eleanor is such a bright girl. I'd hate to see her limited by this diagnosis. Actually, Ellie interjected quietly, the diagnosis has been liberating, not limiting. For the first time, I understand why certain things are harder for me than they should be, and I'm finding strategies that actually help. David, who had followed the conversation from the living room, joined them. Good for you, kiddo. Understanding yourself is half the battle in life. He shot his sister Valerie a pointed look. Some people never manage it. Valerie rolled her eyes. Spare me the pop psychology, David. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, Margaret announced, clearly attempting to redirect the conversation. Ellie, when you finish the table, please help your mother with the sweet potatoes. As the family dispersed, Diana's youngest brother Michael pulled her aside in the hallway. Hey, about Ellie's diagnosis, he he said quietly. I've been reading about ADHD since you mentioned it. Some of the symptoms, they sound familiar. Diana studied her brother always, the family underachiever, despite his obvious intelligence. Familiar how? Michael shrugged uncomfortably. Just, my whole life I've felt like I was working twice as hard as everyone else just to keep up, constantly losing things, missing deadlines, unable to focus on boring tasks no matter how important they are. I always thought I was just lazy or undisciplined. You were never lazy, Michael, Diana said softly. Dad called you that, but it wasn't true. Maybe not. He glanced toward the dining room, where Ellie was carefully arranging napkins. Watching Ellie struggle all these years, I recognized myself in her. I just didn't have a name for it. Diana squeezed his arm. It's never too late to find answers, maybe. Michael smiled ruefully. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I think you're doing right by her. Much better than our parents did for us if this turns out to run in the family. The comment lingered with Diana through dinner preparations. She watched her mother direct the kitchen activities with characteristic precision, everything planned down to the minute. Margaret's purse always contained multiple lists. Her home office featured elaborate filing systems, and her daily planner was a marvel of color coding and detailed notation. Compensatory strategies, Dr. Chen might call them, the external structures that some people with ADHD created to manage their internal chaos. Dinner itself was a predictably tense affair, with conversation carefully steered toward neutral topics whenever possible. It wasn't until dessert that the subject of Ellie's diagnosis resurfaced. I hear James is back in town, Valerie said casually, too casually, as she served herself a generous portion of pumpkin pie. Have you seen him, Ellie? Diana stiffened, but remained silent, letting Ellie navigate the question. Dad calls sometimes, Ellie said carefully. We had coffee last month when he was between projects. Such a creative man, Margaret commented. Brilliant, but unconventional. Unreliable. You mean? David muttered. He's trying, Ellie defended weakly. He just struggles with structure. Diana set down her fork with deliberate care. James has many qualities that likely contributed to our marriage ending. Some of them may well be related to undiagnosed ADHD. The table fell silent. What makes you say that? Margaret finally asked. The hyperfocus on new, exciting projects, the inability to maintain interest in routine responsibilities, the chronic disorganization and time blindness. Diana shrugged. Classic symptoms, in retrospect. So now you're diagnosing your ex-husband? Valerie asked with a raised eyebrow. I'm recognizing patterns, Valerie, the same patterns that went unrecognized in Ellie for 16 years, the same patterns that might exist in other members of this family. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. I don't see the point in speculating about such things. The point, Mom, is understanding. James isn't just irresponsible, his brain literally works differently. That doesn't excuse his choices, but it does explain some of them. Diana looked directly at her mother. Just as it might explain why Dad was so chronically late to everything, despite your constant reminders, or why Michael struggled in school despite his obvious intelligence, or why I developed such extreme organizational systems just to function in daily life. Diana, Margaret's voice held a warning. It's okay, Grandma, Ellie interjected. ADHD isn't a character flaw. It's just a different brain wiring, and it often runs in families. Well, it certainly didn't come from my side, Margaret said firmly. Whitakers have always been disciplined, focused people. David laughed suddenly. Mom, Grandpa William was notorious for starting projects he never finished. Remember the boat in the garage that took him 15 years to not complete? The half-painted rooms? The career changes every few years. He was creative, Margaret insisted, entrepreneurial. He was textbook ADHD, David countered. And so was Dad, though in different ways. And probably half the people at this table, if we're being honest. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Michael. I've scheduled an evaluation, he said quietly. Next month. All eyes turned to him in surprise. Why on earth would you do that? Margaret demanded. Because I'm 42 years old and still struggling with the same issues I had in elementary school, Michael replied. Because I'm tired of believing I'm just lazy or incompetent. Because if there's a name for what makes certain things so damn hard for me, I want to know it. Diana reached across the table and squeezed her brother's hand, unexpected tears pricking her eyes. Well, Margaret said after a moment, her voice slightly less certain. I suppose there's no harm in information. It was as close to approval as they were likely to get. Later, as they prepared to leave, Margaret pulled Ellie aside. Your mother tells me you're doing better in school with these accommodations. Yes, Ellie confirmed. Much better. Margaret nodded, her expression unreadable. Good, that's good. She hesitated, then added, you know, your grandfather William would have understood your struggles. He was brilliant but scattered like stars that couldn't form a constellation. Is that where Mom gets it from? And maybe me gets what ADHD, if it runs in families? Margaret's gaze drifted to the family photos on the wall. Perhaps, but we didn't have such names for things then. We just managed, some better than others. As they drove home, Ellie stared out the window at the darkened streets. That was intense. Diana sighed. Holidays with the Whitakers usually are. Do you really think Dad has ADHD too? I think it's likely. Many of his traits align with the diagnosis. But ultimately, that's his journey to explore, not ours. Ellie nodded, processing this new lens through which to view her father not just as the man who'd left, but as someone who might share her neurological challenges. It's strange, she said finally. Learning about ADHD hasn't just changed how I see myself, it's changed how I see everyone. Diana reached across the console to squeeze her daughter's hand. That's what understanding does, Eleanor. It ripples outward, touching everything in its path. The Campbell home underwent a subtle transformation over the winter months. The rigid organizational systems Diana had previously imposed, systems that had often collapsed under their own weight, gave way to more ADHD-friendly approaches designed with both Ellie and Diana in mind. I still don't understand why we're doing this, Ellie complained one Saturday morning as they cleared the dining room wall. What was wrong with the calendar in the kitchen? Nothing was wrong with it, Diana explained, measuring the wall space. But Jessica suggested visual management systems that work with our brains rather than against them. The kitchen calendar was too small and too easily ignored. Together, they installed an enormous whiteboard calendar that dominated the wall. Using colorful markers, they filled in appointments, deadlines, and commitments for the month ahead. Now, for the daily board, Diana said, moving to the adjacent wall where they hung a second, vertical whiteboard divided into sections. Morning, routine, afternoon tasks, evening routine. Ellie read from the headings Diana had pre-written. Isn't this a bit childish? I'm 16, not 6. It's not about age, it's about executive function, Diana replied, uncapping a blue marker. Visual cues and external structures help compensate for internal regulation challenges. Besides, she added with a small smile, I'm 39, and I'm using it too. Diana's own ADHD diagnosis had arrived shortly after Thanksgiving, bringing with it a complex mixture of validation and regret. While finally understanding her own lifelong struggles had been liberating, it had also intensified her guilt over having misinterpreted Ellie's difficulties for so many years. I should have recognized the signs, she'd told her therapist during a particularly difficult session. They were the same ones I experienced growing up. You couldn't have recognized in Ellie what you didn't understand in yourself, Dr. Wilson had replied gently. What matters is what you do with that understanding now. What Diana chose to do was transform their home environment to support rather than fight against their shared neurotype. The kitchen timer that had once been a tool for punishment, you have exactly 30 minutes to finish this homework, Eleanor, became a friend in the battle against time blindness. Let's set the timer for 15 minutes and see how much we can accomplish before it rings. The rigid homework schedule gave way to a more flexible system that honored Ellie's energy fluctuations and attention patterns. They discovered that Ellie often did her best math work late in the evening, while history readings were more manageable in the afternoon. Homework sessions included regular movement breaks, fidget tools, and background music that Diana would have previously forbidden as distractions. The key is understanding the difference between distraction and stimulation, Jessica Ramirez explained during a joint coaching session. The ADHD brain often needs more stimulation, not less, to reach optimal focus. That's why so many people with ADHD paradoxically concentrate better with some background noise or movement. Diana found herself implementing similar strategies in her own work life. The pristine, minimalist home office she'd once maintained evolved to include a small exercise ball for bouncing while reading case files, fidget cubes discreetly placed in desk drawers, and noise-canceling headphones for overwhelming days. It's like I've spent my entire life swimming against the current, she told Ellie one evening as they reviewed their new medication schedules together. Diana had opted to try medication after careful consideration. I built all these elaborate systems to force myself to function normally, never realizing there might be an easier way. Like what? Like accepting how my brain actually works, instead of how I thought it should work. Diana smiled ruefully. Do you know I used to 5 different alarms to get through my morning routine. I thought everyone had to do that to function. Ellie laughed. I have 3 just to wake up. Exactly. We developed all these compensatory strategies without even realizing it. Now we can be more intentional about the tools we choose. Their weekly therapy sessions, individual and joint, became anchors in their increasingly effective routine. Diana worked through her perfectionism and rigidity. Recognizing how these traits had developed as coping mechanisms for her undiagnosed ADHD, Ellie gained skills in self-advocacy and emotional regulation, particularly around her sensitivity to perceived criticism. One of the most profound shifts came in how they handled setbacks. When Ellie forgot a major assignment despite their new systems, the old pattern would have involved Diana's disappointment and Ellie's shame. Instead, they approached it as information rather than failure. The visual reminder wasn't enough for this type of assignment, Diana observed without judgment. What might work better next time? Maybe an alert on my phone with multiple reminders, Ellie suggested. And breaking it down on the task board instead of just listing it as one big project. Good thinking. Let's try that approach for your history paper. This collaborative problem-solving replaced the adversarial dynamic that had characterized so many of their previous interactions around school. They became partners rather than opponents, united against the challenges rather than each other. Not every new strategy worked. The elaborate morning routine chart proved too complex and was eventually simplified to a simple checklist. The homework station they created in the living room failed because Ellie found the space too open and distracting. Through trial and error, they discovered that Ellie needed a workspace with walls on 3 sides to limit visual stimulation, leading to a rearrangement of her bedroom furniture to create a focused nook. Think of it like A/B testing, Jessica suggested when they reported their adjustments during a session. You're collecting data about what works and what doesn't, then making informed changes based on real-world results. That's actually a sophisticated metacognitive approach. The vocabulary of deficit and disorder gradually disappeared from their home, replaced by discussions of neurodiversity, executive function, and accommodation. Phrases like try harder and pay attention gave way to what support do you need, and how can we adapt this? One evening, as they prepared dinner together, another new routine that provided structured connection time, Ellie observed, you know what's weird? School is actually easier now, even though the work is the same. Diana looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. How so? Before, I was always fighting to battles the actual schoolwork, plus the battle against my own brain. Now I'm just dealing with the schoolwork. Ellie paused, knife hovering over an onion. It's still challenging, but it's like a fair fight now. Diana nodded, understanding completely. That's beautifully put. Plus, Ellie added with a slight smile, coming home isn't a third battle anymore. Diana's hand stilled momentarily as the words registered both their content and the casual way Ellie had delivered them, without fear or resentment. I'm glad, she said softly, blinking back unexpected tears. That might be the most important change of all. Progress isn't linear. Jessica had emphasized this repeatedly in their sessions, preparing both Campbell women for the inevitable ups and downs of their journey. Still, the setback, when it came, caught them both by surprise. The college fair at Westfield High was a major event. Representatives from 50 universities crowded the gymnasium, armed with glossy brochures and practiced smiles. For juniors, like Ellie, it represented the first formal step toward the future that suddenly seemed more attainable with her improved academic performance over the past semester. Remember to get information from at least 5 liberal arts colleges, Diana reminded Ellie as they pulled into the school parking lot, not just art schools. I know, Mom, Ellie replied, suppressing a sigh. They'd discussed her college research strategy extensively the night before. And don't forget to ask about their disability services. Support systems vary dramatically between institutions. I've got the questions written down, just like we practiced. Ellie patted her notebook. Perfect. Diana checked her watch. I'll pick you up at 5:30. That gives you 2 full hours to explore options. Ellie nodded, already reaching for the door handle. Oh, and Eleanor, Diana called as Ellie started to exit the car. I'm proud of you for approaching this so it shows real growth. The unexpected praise warmed Ellie as she navigated through the crowded gymnasium. She followed her carefully constructed plan, visiting her priority schools first, asking prepared questions, and taking meticulous notes. By the third hour, however, the noise, lights, and social demands began taking their toll. The medication that usually helped her navigate such environments had worn off, leaving her vulnerable to the sensory onslaught. Her focus fragmented. Questions she'd rehearsed vanished from memory mid-sentence. The colorful brochures she'd collected became a disorganized pile in her arms as she struggled to maintain her system. A persistent headache bloomed behind her eyes. Just a few more, she muttered to herself, checking her rapidly deteriorating list. The University of Chicago booth was her final priority stop. Diana's alma mater and subtle preference. As Ellie approached the table, a familiar voice called her name. Hannah Miller, perfect Hannah with her perfect grades and perfect college prospects, waved from the Northwestern booth. Ellie, have you talked to Northwestern yet? Their arts program is amazing. Not yet, Ellie replied, attempting a smile despite her mounting sensory distress. I was heading to Chicago next. Chicago? Hannah wrinkled her nose. So traditional. Come check out Northwestern with me. The rep is super nice. Hesitating, Ellie glanced at her watch. She still had 40 minutes before her mother would return, and Northwestern had been on her secondary list. Maybe a brief detour wouldn't hurt. 90 minutes later, Diana stood in the nearly empty gymnasium, arms crossed tightly over her chest as Ellie finally emerged from a cluster of students surrounding the RISD representative. I've been calling you for an hour, Diana said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Where were you? Ellie's stomach dropped. Her phone, silenced for the event, had remained untouched in her backpack. I'm sorry I lost track of time talking to the art school reps. Art schools? Diana's eyebrow arched dangerously. What about the liberal arts colleges we discussed? What about Chicago? I got sidetracked, Ellie admitted, fatigue making her voice smaller than she intended. Hannah wanted to show me Northwestern, and then I met the RISD rep, and so you completely abandoned our plan because Hannah suggested something else. Diana's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby stragglers. This is exactly the impulsivity we've been working on managing, Eleanor. It wasn't like that, Ellie protested, her own frustration mounting. I got overwhelmed with all the people and noise, and my medication wore off, and excuses. Diana cut in sharply. You had a plan, you had strategies, you chose not to use them. The word landed like a physical blow. Excuses, after months of understanding, of Diana acknowledging that Ellie's struggles were real and not character flaws. They were back to square one, back to try harder, and just focus and stop making excuses. You sound exactly like you did before, Ellie said, tears threatening, like nothing's changed. What's changed is my expectation that you're implementing the tools we've developed. Diana gestured toward the exit, her movements stiff with disapproval. Let's continue this discussion at home. The drive passed in crackling silence. Ellie stared out the window, simultaneously hurt, angry, and ashamed. She had gotten overwhelmed and diverted from their plan. She had forgotten to check her phone. She had failed to use the coping strategies they'd practiced. But did that justify Diana's sharp reversion to her old patterns? At home, Diana headed straight to her office while Ellie retreated to her bedroom, both seeking space to process their emotions. The fragile new dynamic between them felt suddenly endangered, as if the progress of recent months had been built on shakier foundation than either had realized. An hour later, Diana knocked on Ellie's door. Eleanor, dinner's ready. Ellie emerged, reluctantly, following her mother to the kitchen where 2 plates waited on the island counter rather than at their usual dining table spots. The physical distance seemed symbolic of the emotional chasm that had reopened between them. They ate in uncomfortable silence until Diana finally spoke. I was worried when I couldn't reach you. Ellie poked at her pasta without looking up. You were angry, not worried. I was both, Diana admitted, and my anger was ... disproportionate. Ellie glanced up, surprised by the concession. But, Diana continued, her tone hardening slightly, your behavior was still irresponsible. We had a clear plan with specific goals, and you abandoned it on impulse. It wasn't impulse, Ellie countered, frustration bubbling up again. It was overwhelm. There's a difference. The result was the same. So the reason doesn't matter. My actual experience doesn't matter. Ellie's voice cracked. I thought we were past that. Diana set down her fork with deliberate care. What matters is developing reliable strategies to manage challenges. Yes, you got overwhelmed. Yes, your medication timing was unfortunate, but you had backup strategies we'd specifically developed for those situations, and you didn't use them, because I couldn't remember them in the moment. Ellie pushed her plate away, appetite gone. That's how ADHD works, Mom. Executive function fails under stress. We've talked about this 100 times in therapy. Don't raise your voice, Eleanor. Then actually listen to what I'm saying. Ellie stood abruptly. You're acting like I chose to ignore our plan, like I wanted to mess up and disappoint you. I didn't. I got overwhelmed. The strategies weren't accessible when I needed them, and I made decisions in survival mode. That's not lack of effort or responsibilities, disability. Diana's expression tightened. Being disabled doesn't exempt you from consequences or accountability. No, but it should exempt me from being treated like I failed on purpose. Tears spilled over as Ellie's frustration peaked. I thought you understood now. I thought things were different. The pain in her daughter's voice finally penetrated Diana's defensive anger. She closed her eyes briefly, recognition dawning of how quickly she'd reverted to old patterns at the first sign of difficulty. Eleanor, I need some space, Ellie interrupted, already moving toward her room. I can't do this right now. The sound of Ellie's bedroom door closing, not quite a slam, but firm enough to make its point, left Diana alone with her cooling pasta and the uncomfortable realization that their progress was more fragile than she'd believed. She'd failed the first real test of their new understanding. At the first deviation from plan, the first hint of the old challenges, she'd fallen back into the familiar role of disciplinarian rather than ally. All their work, all their growth set aside in an instant of fear and frustration. The realization settled heavily in her chest as Diana cleared the barely touched dinner plates. They'd come so far, yet the old patterns remained just beneath the surface, ready to emerge in moments of stress. The question now was whether they could find their way back to understanding, or if this setback would redefine their fragile new relationship. The weekend following the college fair passed in uncomfortable détente. Diana and Ellie moved around each other carefully, exchanging necessary information but avoiding the underlying tension. Their usual Sunday dinner at Margaret Whittaker's house loomed like an unwelcome obligation, one that neither felt prepared to navigate given their current discord. We should cancel, Diana suggested as they prepared to leave. Tell Mom you're not feeling well. Ellie shook her head. Grandma would just reschedule. Besides, she made cherry pie. The drive to Margaret's tidy suburban home passed in silence, both Campbell women lost in their own thoughts. The argument had left a bruise on their healing relationship, not a fatal wound, but a painful reminder of how easily old patterns could resurface. Margaret greeted them at the door with her usual, precise, affectionate, measured hug for Diana, a pat on the cheek for Ellie. You're looking peaky, Eleanor, she observed, ushering them inside. Not sleeping enough. School's been busy, Ellie replied vaguely. Margaret's home remained frozen in time, formal furniture, too pristine to be comfortable. Family photos in perfect alignment on walls, not a speck of dust to be found. Diana had grown up in this mausoleum of order, absorbing her mother's rigid standards until they became her own. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, Margaret announced, heading toward the kitchen. Diana, would you mind setting the table? Eleanor can help me finish the salad. In the kitchen, Margaret handed Ellie a knife and cutting board. Cucumber, please. Thin slices, uniform width. Ellie began cutting, conscious of her grandmother's evaluating gaze. Margaret had been skeptical of Ellie's diagnosis initially, though she'd softened somewhat since Thanksgiving. Still, she rarely referenced it directly, preferring to operate as if nothing had fundamentally changed. You and your mother seem tense today, Margaret observed casually as she checked the roast in the oven. Ellie kept her eyes on the cucumber. We had a disagreement about the college fair. I got overwhelmed and didn't follow our plan. Mom was upset. Margaret made a non-committal sound as she adjusted the oven temperature. Your mother has always placed great value on plans. Even as a child, she'd become quite distraught when things deviated from expectation. Ellie glanced up in surprise. Her grandmother rarely offered insights into Diana's childhood. She had the most elaborate systems, Margaret continued, a hint of something like fondness softening her voice. Color-coded notebooks for each subject, precisely arranged. Heaven help anyone who disturbed them. Mom's still like that, Ellie said. Our house has more organizational systems than a military base. Margaret smiled slightly. She comes by it honestly. I've always been the same way. Is that why? Ellie hesitated, uncertain how far to push this unexpected opening. Is that why you weren't surprised about my diagnosis? Or Mom's? Margaret's hand stilled momentarily over the salad bowl. Let's say I recognized certain familiar patterns. In the dining room, Diana arranged silverware with mechanical precision, her mind still circling the unresolved tension with Ellie. She'd overreacted at the college fair. She knew that Ellie's dismissal of their carefully constructed plan had triggered something deep and reflexive, the same anxiety she'd felt whenever her own carefully maintained systems had failed her growing up. Need help? Her mother's voice startled her from her thoughts. Almost finished. Diana placed the last fork in perfect alignment. Where's Ellie? Finishing the salad. Margaret smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the tablecloth. She mentioned you two had a disagreement about the college fair. Diana suppressed a flicker of irritation. It's nothing serious. Margaret adjusted a knife that was already perfectly positioned. You know, watching you with Eleanor sometimes feels like watching myself with you 30 years ago. Diana froze. What does that mean? It means, Margaret said carefully, that I recognize the dynamic. The frustration when she doesn't meet expectations. The disappointment when carefully made plans collapse. The feeling that if she would just try harder, just be more careful, everything would work smoothly. That's not, Diana began defensively, then stopped herself. Maybe there are some similarities. Margaret nodded. I expected perfection from you because I needed it from myself. Anything less felt like failure, dangerous, chaotic failure. Diana stared at her mother, this woman who had always seemed carved from marble in her certainty and control. Why dangerous? Margaret seemed to debate with herself before answering. Because without my systems, without perfect order, everything fell apart, my thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. Tasks half completed, appointments missed, details overlooked. The chaos was frightening. Understanding dawned slowly. Mom, are you saying I'm saying I recognize more than you think in both you and Eleanor. Margaret straightened a napkin with precise movements. My generation didn't have names for such things, we just developed our coping mechanisms and carried on. Your lists, Diana said softly. Your filing systems, the daily planners, survival tools. Margaret's smile held a hint of self-deprecation. Rather effective ones, actually. Though maintaining them consumed considerable energy, Diana struggled to reconcile this new information with her lifetime of assumptions about her mother. Why didn't you ever say anything? When I was struggling in school, when I developed my own extreme systems, when Ellie started showing the same patterns double quotes because I didn't have the vocabulary for it, because admitting my own difficulties felt like admitting weakness. Margaret met her daughter's gaze directly, because I thought my way was the only way to function in a world that has little patience for minds like ours. The plural pronoun, minds like ours, landed with significant weight. Dinner's ready, Ellie announced from the doorway, carrying the salad bowl. Throughout the meal, Diana observed her mother with new awareness, the methodical way Margaret ate, one food group at a time, the slight tension in her posture when conversation became too chaotic, the carefully modulated transitions between topics. How had she never recognized these patterns for what they were? After dinner, Margaret suggested Ellie help her select a movie, while Diana cleared the table, an unusual departure from Margaret's typical insistence on handling her own kitchen. Diana recognized the orchestrated opportunity for private conversation between grandmother and granddaughter, and found herself curious rather than concerned. In the living room, Ellie browsed through Margaret's small, alphabetized DVD collection, while her grandmother settled into her preferred armchair. Your mother told me about the college fair, Margaret said without preamble. Ellie tensed. She thinks I was irresponsible. Perhaps, or perhaps she was frightened. Frightened of what? Margaret considered her answer carefully. Of disorder, of plans collapsing, of the feelings that emerge when carefully constructed systems fail. She paused. Feelings I believe you understand quite well. Ellie turned to face her grandmother fully. Why are you defending her? You've never exactly been supportive of the whole ADHD thing. I'm not defending her reaction, Margaret clarified. I'm contextualizing it. Diana reverted to old patterns, under stress patterns she learned, in part, from me. You. Margaret nodded. I've never been officially diagnosed, Eleanor, but let's just say that your challenges are not unfamiliar to me. Ellie's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You too. Let's just say that perfect order was never a luxury for MIT was a necessity. Margaret smoothed her already immaculate skirt. Your mother grew up with my rigid systems, my intolerance for deviation, my fear of disorder. She absorbed those patterns and applied them to herself, and later to you. So when I didn't follow our plan, she felt the same anxiety, the same fear of collapse that she'd experienced her entire life when her own systems failed. Margaret leaned forward slightly. That doesn't excuse her reaction, Eleanor, but it might help you understand it. In the kitchen, Diana wiped the already clean counter, processing her mother's unexpected revelations. The possibility that perfectionistic Margaret might share the neurological differences that Diana and Ellie struggled with, recontextualized a lifetime of interactions. The sound of laughter from the living room drew her attention. Through the doorway, she could see her mother and daughter sitting closer than usual, Ellie animatedly describing something while Margaret listened with uncharacteristic openness. When they returned home that evening, the tension between Diana and Ellie had softened, though not disappeared entirely. As Ellie prepared for bed, Diana knocked gently on her door. "What did you and Mom talk about?" she asked when Ellie invited her in. Ellie sat cross-legged on her bed, already in pajamas. "Grandma thinks she probably has ADHD too. She just never knew what to call it." Diana nodded. "She suggested as much to me as well. She said it's why you both need so much structure and order, that without it, everything feels like it's falling apart." Ellie studied her mother's face. "Is that how you felt at the college fair? Like everything was falling apart when I didn't follow the plan?" Diana sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, it triggered an old, deep anxiety, one I've felt my whole life when systems fail. But that's my issue to manage, not yours to accommodate." "Maybe it's both," Ellie suggested. "Maybe I could be more consistent with strategies, and you could be more understanding when they don't work perfectly." "That sounds reasonable." Diana hesitated. "I'm sorry, I reverted to old patterns. I'm still learning too." "Me too," Ellie offered, a small smile. "Grandma said we're all works in progress." Diana raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like Mom." "I think Grandma has hidden depths," Ellie replied with a hint of mischief. "She also said she's joining a senior center book club about neuro for general interest." The image of Margaret Whittaker voluntarily discussing neurodiversity was so unexpected that Diana laughed outright. Wonders never cease. As she wished Ellie good night and headed to her own room, Diana reflected on the day's revelations. 3 generations of women, connected not just by blood but by shared neurological experiences, each adapting in her own way to a world that wasn't designed for minds like theirs. The knowledge brought both comfort and challenge, comfort in understanding, challenge in breaking cycles that no longer served them, and somehow, unexpectedly, Margaret had become an ally in that process, a bridge between past and future, between old coping mechanisms and new understanding. Ms. Delaney's voice carried through the English classroom as she outlined their final project for junior year. "This personal essay will constitute 20% of your semester grade. The topic is invisible challenges, exploring something difficult that others may not readily see or understand." Ellie's pencil stilled over her notebook. Invisible challenges. The phrase might as well have been crafted specifically for her. "You'll present these essays to the class during the last week of the semester," Ms. Delaney continued. "This isn't just about writing skills, it's about vulnerability and authentic communication." Beside Ellie, Hannah groaned quietly. "Great. Public speaking and oversharing, my 2 favorite things." But Ellie barely heard her. An idea was taking shape, fragile but insistent. After months of therapy, medication adjustments, and new strategies, she had finally reached a place of tentative peace with her ADHD diagnosis. What if she wrote about that journey? The thought of publicly discussing something so personal sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. Yet something about the possibility felt right necessary. Even that evening, she broached the subject with Diana over dinner. "Ms. Delaney assigned our final essay today. It's about invisible challenges. Ellie pushed pasta around her plate. I'm thinking about writing about ADHD. Diana looked up, surprised. That's certainly appropriate for the topic. Are you comfortable sharing something so personal? I think so. Ellie set down her fork. All these months, I've been focusing on how ADHD affects me. But what if my experience could help someone else? Someone who's struggling without knowing why, like I was. Diana's expression softened with something like pride. That's a generous perspective. Eleanor, will you read it when I'm done? Before I submit it, of course, but only if you want me to. The writing process proved more challenging than Ellie anticipated, finding the right words to capture her experience, the fog that had shrouded her thoughts for years, the shame of chronic failure, the revelation of diagnosis. The complex journey towards self-acceptance required deeper introspection than any academic assignment had ever demanded. She worked on it in fragments over several weeks, sometimes writing feverishly for hours when inspiration struck, other times staring at the blinking cursor for what felt like eternity. The familiar ADHD pattern of hyperfocus, alternating with paralysis, made the process both exhilarating and excruciating. Finally, 3 days before the deadline, she completed a draft she felt ready to share. Diana read it that evening, tissues in hand by the second page. Well, Ellie asked nervously when her mother finished reading. It's beautiful, Eleanor. Diana wiped her eyes, honest and insightful and so articulate about experiences that are difficult to put into words. Do you think it's too personal, too revealing? Diana considered the question carefully. It's definitely personal. But that's what gives it power. You're not just explaining ADHD, you're inviting readers into your lived experience. That's how understanding grows. Ellie nodded, anxiety mingling with determination. That's what I want. For people to understand. The day of presentations arrived. With Ellie's stomach in knots, she'd practiced reading her essay aloud multiple times, using the strategies her therapist had suggested for managing performance anxiety. Still, as Ms. Delaney called her name, her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. Ellie approached the front of the classroom on wobbly legs, clutching her printed essay. 26 pairs of eyes watched her, some curious, some already glazed with boredom, a few encouraging. She took a deep breath and began. For 16 years, I believed I was broken, not dramatically, not completely, just fundamentally flawed in some essential way that made me different from everyone else. I tried harder. I stayed up later. I made lists and schedules and promises to do better. Nothing worked. The fog in my brain remained. The chaos of my thoughts continued, and the gap between my intentions and my actions widened until it seemed impossible to cross. Her voice gained strength as she continued, describing the daily battles that had defined her existence, the swimming letters on homework pages, the instructions that evaporated from memory moments after hearing them, the crushing weight of disappointing others despite her best efforts. I wasn't lazy, I wasn't unmotivated, I wasn't choosing to fail. I was struggling with an invisible disability that affected every aspect of my life, a disability with a name I didn't yet know, ADHD. As she read about her diagnosis and the complex emotions it had triggered, Ellie noticed a shift in the classroom. The initial restlessness had quieted. Several students leaned forward in their seats, their expressions reflecting recognition or curiosity or both. Medication helps, therapy helps, accommodations help. But the most transformative part of this journey has been understanding. Understanding that my brain works differently, not defectively. Understanding that struggling doesn't mean failing. Understanding that I'm not alone. She continued through her conclusion, voice steady despite the tears that threatened. ADHD isn't something I have, it's part of who I am. It brings challenges, yes, but also gifts, creativity, empathy, an ability to make unusual connections. I'm learning to embrace the whole package, to work with my brain instead of against it. The fog hasn't lifted entirely, but now there are pathways through it, pathways I'm still discovering every day. When Ellie finished reading, the classroom remained silent for a long moment. Then Hannah started clapping, followed quickly by others. Ms. Delaney wiped discreetly at her eyes before joining the applause. Thank you for that powerful essay, Eleanor, she said when the room quieted. Does anyone have questions or reflections to share? Hands rose throughout the classroom. To Ellie's surprise, the questions weren't perfunctory or judgmental but genuinely curious. How did she realize something was wrong? What did medication feel like? How could friends better support people with ADHD? Most surprising was disengaged Tyler, who rarely contributed to class discussions, asking in an uncharacteristically serious tone, "How did you figure out the difference between just being bad at school and actually having ADHD?" The question resonated so clearly with Ellie's own journey that she answered with particular care, explaining the patterns that differentiated ADHD from simple academic struggles. After class, several students approached her individually. Hannah admitted she'd never understood why Ellie sometimes seemed to zone out during conversations. A quiet girl named Sophia confided that her brother had recently been diagnosed with ADHD and asked if Ellie would mind talking with him sometime. Most meaningful was Ms. Delaney's comment as Ellie gathered her belongings. "You've given voice to an experience many people share but few discuss openly. That kind of vulnerability creates space for others to be honest about their own struggles." That evening, Ellie recounted the day's events to Diana over dinner, still processing the unexpected impact of her essay. "Ms. Delaney wants to submit it to the school literary magazine," she said, mixing the foods on her plate in a way Diana no longer corrected, "and she asked if I'd consider speaking at next fall's freshman orientation about learning differences." "That's wonderful," Diana replied. "How do you feel about it?" Ellie considered the question. "Nervous, but good nervous, you know. Like maybe my experience could actually help someone else feel less alone." "I have no doubt it will." Diana reached across the table to squeeze Ellie's hand. "You've found your voice, Eleanor. That's a powerful thing." Later that night, as Ellie prepared for bed, her phone pinged with an unexpected message from Tyler. "Your essay made me think maybe I should get tested. TX for being brave enough to share." She stared at the message for a long moment, a complex mixture of emotions washing through her. The shame and isolation that had defined so much of her life were gradually being replaced by something new and precious: purpose. Her struggles, once seemingly pointless, now formed a bridge of understanding to others walking similar paths. For the first time, Ellie considered that perhaps her differences weren't just challenges to overcome but gifts to share, that her voice, shaped by difficulty, might speak truth that others needed to hear. Diana sat in her car outside the community center, 15 minutes early for her first ADHD parent support group meeting. Punctuality had always been her armor against the time blindness that had plagued her since childhood. Better absurdly early than embarrassingly late. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her blouse. The polished, professional appearance was another form of armor, one she'd relied on throughout her legal career to compensate for the internal chaos only she could see. Today, however, she wasn't appearing in court or meeting with clients. Today, she was simply a mother seeking connection with others who might understand her journey. The thought sent a flutter of anxiety through her chest. Vulnerability had never been Diana's strong suit. She'd spent decades constructing elaborate defenses against her own perceived weaknesses, systems and structures designed to hide the struggles she now knew stemmed from undiagnosed ADHD. The idea of deliberately exposing those struggles to strangers felt profoundly uncomfortable, yet here she was, prompted by her therapist's gentle suggestion and Ellie's courageous example. If her 16-year-old daughter could share her story in front of her entire English class, surely Diana could discuss her experiences in a supportive setting of fellow parents. At precisely 7:25, 5 minutes before the scheduled start time, Diana entered the community center. The meeting room was arranged in a casual circle of chairs, nothing like the formal conference rooms she typically inhabited. A small table held coffee, tea, and homemade cookies alongside pamphlets about ADHD resources. First time, a woman with curly gray hair and vibrant red glasses approached with a warm smile. "I'm Patrice, the group facilitator." Diana nodded, introducing herself with more hesitation than she'd shown in professional settings in years. "Welcome," Patrice said, guiding her toward the circle. "We're pretty informal here. Some parents are just starting the diagnosis journey, others have been managing ADHD for years. Everyone's experience is valid, and there's no pressure to share more than you're comfortable with." By 7:35, the circle had filled with a diverse group of about 15 parents. Patrice opened the meeting with a brief introduction of the group's purpose and guidelines, before inviting a woman named Cynthia to share an update on her son's recent medication adjustment. As the conversation flowed around her, Diana observed the interaction with growing surprise. These parents spoke about meltdowns and missed assignments and medication side effects with remarkable candor, no shame. No defensiveness, just honest acknowledgement of the challenges and small victories that comprised their daily lives. Diana, would you like to introduce yourself? Patricia's gentle prompt pulled her from her observations. Just whatever you're comfortable sharing. Diana straightened in her chair. My daughter Eleanor is 16. She was diagnosed with ADHD about 6 months ago. She paused, then added with careful deliberation, I received my own diagnosis shortly after. The simple statement acknowledging her own neurodivergence in a public setting for the first time felt strangely liberating. The dual diagnosis experience is increasingly common, Patrice noted. What has that journey been like for you both? Diana hesitated, legal training, urging caution about personal disclosures, but something about the authentic exchanges she'd witnessed loosened her usual restraint. Complicated, she admitted. Before our diagnoses, I misinterpreted Eleanor's struggles completely. I thought she just needed more discipline, more structure, the things that had helped me compensate without realizing what I was compensating for. Nods of recognition around the circle encouraged her to continue. I pushed her in ways that were counterproductive, even harmful. I see that now. We're building a new relationship based on understanding rather than misconception, but there's residual damage. I think all of us have some version of that story. A father across the circle said, the things we did or said before we understood what was really happening. The parent guilt is real, another mother added, but beating ourselves up doesn't help our kids. The conversation expanded, with parents sharing strategies that had worked, approaches that had failed, and the complex emotions that accompanied supporting a neurodivergent child while often managing similar challenges themselves. Diana found herself taking notes, not her usual meticulous system, but quick jottings of ideas that resonated. A father's approach to collaborative problem-solving, rather than top-down consequences. A mother's sensory emergency kit for overwhelming situations. A family's use of visual rather than verbal reminders for household responsibilities. When the meeting ended, Diana lingered, exchanging contact information with several parents whose experiences particularly resonated with her own. She left feeling lighter somehow, as if sharing even a small portion of her struggles had diminished their weight. The support group became a monthly fixture in Diana's calendar, one she prioritized with the same commitment she gave to important client meetings. Gradually, she began contributing more actively, sharing both challenges and insights from her dual perspective as an ADHD parent raising an ADHD child. Her professional skills found unexpected application in this new context. When a frustrated mother mentioned her son's school refusing accommodations despite a formal diagnosis, Diana offered to review the documentation and suggest specific language to strengthen the request. When another parent described workplace discrimination following disclosure, Diana provided resources on disability rights and employment law. Patrice commented after Diana had stayed late to help organize resources for an upcoming parent education night. You have a unique combination of personal experience and professional expertise that's incredibly valuable to this community. Diana dismissed the observation with characteristic modesty, but the seed had been planted. Over the following weeks, it germinated slowly as she found herself increasingly drawn to advocacy work around neurodiversity issues. The opportunity to act on this emerging interest arose unexpectedly through a routine parent-teacher conference at Westfield High. What began as a standard review of Ellie's academic progress evolved into a broader discussion of the school's approach to learning differences. Eleanor's essay about her ADHD experience has sparked important conversations among both students and faculty. Principal Morgan explained, "We're considering developing more comprehensive supports for students with similar challenges. But frankly, we're not sure where to begin." "I might have some thoughts on that," Diana replied, an uncharacteristic spark of enthusiasm in her voice. One conversation led to another. Diana found herself invited to join a newly formed committee focused on improving services for students. Her legal background, personal experience, and growing knowledge of ADHD made her a valuable contributor. At the committee's first public presentation to the school board, Diana volunteered to speak about the importance of appropriate accommodations. Standing at the podium in her customary professional attire, she made a last-minute decision to deviate from her carefully prepared notes. "My name is Diana Campbell. I'm an attorney, a parent of a Westfield student, and a person with ADHD." The public disclosure, once unthinkable, now felt necessary and right. I'm here to discuss how simple accommodations can transform educational outcomes for students whose brains work differently. Her presentation combined statistical data on neurodevelopmental conditions with personal insights about the practical and emotional impact of appropriate supports. She described her daughter's journey from shame and struggle to self-advocacy and success, crediting the accommodations and understanding provided by certain Westfield teachers. These students aren't asking for special treatment or lower standards, she concluded. They're asking for equal opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities without being penalized for neurological differences beyond their control. As a community, we have both a legal and moral obligation to provide that opportunity. The school board approved funding for expanded learning support services and professional development on neurodiversity. Local media coverage of the initiative led to invitations for Diana to speak at neighboring school districts, then at a regional education conference. "You've found your calling," Ellie observed one evening, as Diana prepared materials for a parent workshop she'd been asked to lead. Who would have thought Mom the corporate lawyer would become Mom the ADHD advocate? Diana smiled, recognizing the truth in her daughter's words. Life takes unexpected turns. "Are you going to keep practicing law?" "Yes, but I'm restructuring my practice." Diana had already begun the process of shifting her legal focus toward education law and disability rights. "There's important work to be done at the intersection of neurodiversity and legal advocacy." "Because of me?" Ellie asked, a hint of her old uncertainty in the question. Diana considered her answer carefully. "Because of us. Your journey helped me recognize my own, and together they led me to work that feels more meaningful than anything I've done in 20 years of legal practice." Ellie grinned. "So I helped you find your purpose. You helped me find my voice," Diana corrected gently, echoing the words she'd once said to Ellie. The rest followed naturally. 1 year after Dr. Chun's letter had changed everything, Ellie sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor surrounded by college brochures, the neat piles categorized by location, program strength, and campus size represented a level of organization that would have been impossible 12 months earlier. "Narrowed it down yet?" Diana asked from the doorway, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "Getting there." Ellie accepted the tea gratefully, still torn between RISD and Pratt for art schools, and Northwestern and Michigan for schools with strong art programs, but more general education. Diana settled beside her on the floor, mindful not to disturb the carefully arranged materials. "All excellent options. What's your gut telling you?" "That's the problem, it changes daily." Ellie sighed. "Yesterday I was all about RISD. Today Northwestern feels right. Classic ADHD decision paralysis." "You don't have to decide tonight," Diana reminded her. "The applications aren't due for 2 months." "I know, but I want to work on my portfolio and essays strategically based on where I'm applying." Diana smiled, recognizing her own planning tendencies in her daughter's approach. "A sound strategy. Just remember to build in flexibility. Plans are guidelines, not commandments," says the woman who color codes her grocery lists. Ellie bumped her mother's shoulder playfully. "I'm a work in progress." Diana's self-deprecating tone acknowledged how far she'd come in loosening her rigid standards for both herself and Ellie. They sipped their tea in comfortable silence, a new ease between them that had developed gradually over months of honest conversations, shared insights, and mutual forgiveness. The path hadn't been smooth or straight. There had been setbacks, misunderstandings, and occasional reversions to old patterns, but the general trajectory had been toward greater understanding and acceptance. "I ran into Mrs. Peterson at the pharmacy today," Diana mentioned. "She asked about you. Dad's new wife checking up on me." Ellie's tone held more curiosity than bitterness. Her relationship with her father remained complicated, though it had improved slightly since James had begun exploring his own possible ADHD diagnosis. "Actually, she wanted to thank you. Apparently, your essay about ADHD was shared in her teachers group, and it helped her recognize similar patterns in her son, your half-brother." Ellie looked up in surprise. "Matteo, he's only 5. ADHD often shows differently in young children, especially boys. According to Cynthia, your essay helped her connect the dots and advocate for early intervention." "Wow." Ellie set down her mug, processing this unexpected impact of her writing. "I never thought ... Your words have power." "Eleanor." Diana squeezed her daughter's hand. "They've certainly changed my understanding, and apparently, they're helping others too." Later that evening, as Diana prepared dinner, Ellie sat at the kitchen counter working on calculus homework once, her most dreaded subject, now manageable with proper medication, accommodations, and study strategies. Ms. Rivera asked if I'd mentor a freshman who was just diagnosed, Ellie mentioned, looking up from her textbook. I said yes, that's wonderful. Diana stirred the pasta sauce, adjusting the heat. Anyone I know, Tyler's sister, Emma. Apparently, he suggested me specifically. After my presentation last spring, Diana nodded, remembering how Ellie's classroom essay had eventually expanded into a school-wide presentation on ADHD awareness. A remarkable evolution for a girl who had once hidden her struggles behind a wall of shame. You'll be an excellent mentor, Diana said. You've navigated this journey with extraordinary grace. Ellie snorted. I don't know about grace. Determination, maybe. Desperation at times. All of the above, Diana conceded with a smile. Plus resilience. That's what I admire most, your capacity to keep moving forward despite setbacks. I wonder where I get that from. Ellie's pointed look made Diana laugh. Fair point. After dinner, they settled in the living room with their respective projects. Diana, reviewing materials for an upcoming neurodiversity workshop she was leading at the local community college. Ellie sketching preliminary designs for her art school portfolio. Doorbell's unexpected ring startled them both. Are we expecting someone? Ellie asked, setting aside her sketchbook. Diana shook her head, equally puzzled, and went to answer the door. James Campbell stood on the porch, hands shoved awkwardly in his jacket pockets. His artistic dishevelment, once a source of conflict in their marriage, now registered differently to Diana, filtered through her understanding of executive function challenges. James, this is unexpected. I know, I should have called. He shifted uncomfortably. Is Ellie home? I was hoping to talk to both of you. Diana hesitated only briefly before stepping aside to let him in. We're in the living room. Ellie's surprise at seeing her father was evident, though not unwelcoming. Dad, what's up? James ran a hand through his perpetually rumpled hair. I wanted to share something with you both in person. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, handling it with uncharacteristic care. I got my results today. Understanding dawned on Diana's face. From Dr. Reyes. The evaluation. James nodded, handing the envelope to Ellie. I thought you should be the one to open it, since you started this whole journey for our family. With careful movements, Ellie opened the envelope and scanned the contents. Her expression softened as she looked up at her father. Combined type hyperactive impulsive and inattentive presentations. James nodded, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. All these years, I thought I was just defective somehow. Creative but unreliable. Brilliant but irresponsible. Turns out there's a name for the way my brain works. How do you feel about it? Diana asked, genuine concern in her voice despite their complicated history. Relieved. Angry that no one caught it sooner. Sad about ... opportunities lost. His gaze shifted meaningfully toward Diana, acknowledging without words the role his unmanaged ADHD had played in their marriage's dissolution. But mostly hopeful that understanding might lead to better choices going forward. The three of them talked for over an hour about James's diagnosis, treatment options he was considering, insights he'd gained from reading Ellie's essay, which had indirectly prompted his decision to seek evaluation. The conversation held none of the tension that had characterized their interactions since the divorce, replaced by a cautious but genuine attempt at understanding when James finally departed with promises to keep them updated on his treatment journey. Diana and Ellie returned to the living room in thoughtful silence. That was unexpected, Ellie finally said. Life often is. Diana gathered their abandoned tea mugs. I'm glad he's seeking help. Do you think it would have made a difference? For you and Dad, I mean, if you'd known about ADHD back then? Diana considered the question carefully. Perhaps knowledge creates possibility, but it doesn't guarantee outcomes. She smiled gently at her daughter. What matters is that we have that knowledge now, and we're using it to build better futures individually and together. As summer transitioned to fall and Ellie's senior year progressed, their new normal continued to evolve. College applications were submitted with meticulous attention to detail but without the crippling perfectionism that would have once accompanied the process. Ellie's mentorship of Emma expanded to include 2 other recently diagnosed students, forming an informal support group that met weekly in Ms. Rivera's classroom. Diana's advocacy work grew alongside her restructured legal practice, creating a professional life that aligned more authentically with her values and strengths. Her relationship with her mother deepened as Margaret cautiously began acknowledging her own neurodivergent traits, participating occasionally in Diana's parent workshops, and even starting a gray matter support group for seniors with late diagnosed or suspected ADHD. One evening in early spring, as college acceptance letters began arriving, Diana found Ellie sitting quietly at the kitchen table, an opened envelope before her. Northwestern, Diana asked, recognizing the letterhead. Ellie nodded, a smile spreading slowly across her face. I got in, with a partial scholarship for their special arts program. Eleanor, that's wonderful. Diana embraced her daughter, pride swelling in her chest. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you, Ellie said as they separated. Not just the application process, everything, figuring out the ADHD, finding the right supports, learning to work with my brain instead of against it. You did the hard work, Diana insisted. I just helped navigate some of the logistics. You did more than that. Ellie's expression grew. Serious? You changed. When you read Dr. Chun's letter, you could have doubled down on your old beliefs. Instead, you opened yourself to a completely different understanding of me, of yourself, of everything. That's rare, I think, for a parent to be willing to transform so fundamentally. Unexpected tears pricked Diana's eyes. It was the only right choice, though I wish I'd made it sooner. We got there in the end, Ellie said simply. That's what matters. Later, that night, as Diana prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year, from the devastation of realizing how deeply she had misunderstood her daughter to the hope of building a new relationship based on true understanding, from rigid expectations and constant disappointment to flexible support and genuine pride. The transformation hadn't erased the past, nothing could do that, but it had created space for a different future, one where both she and Ellie could thrive as their authentic selves. Neurodivergence and all. On her nightstand sat a framed copy of Dr. Chen's letter, the document that had shattered her world and then helped rebuild it, stronger and truer than before. Beside it lay a handwritten note Ellie had given her on Mother's Day. Mom, thank you for reading the letter that changed everything. Thank you for your tears, your apologies, your willingness to learn and grow. Thank you for showing me that understanding is more powerful than judgment, that flexibility is stronger than rigidity, that love can transform even our deepest wounds into wisdom. I am who I am because of you, not despite you. Love, Ellie. Diana touched the note gently, gratitude filling her heart for all the pain and misunderstanding that had marked their journey. She wouldn't trade the hard-won wisdom it had yielded. Sometimes, it took a shattering to create space for something new, to grow something authentic, honest, and whole in a way that perfection never could be.